don't like them putting chemicals in the water that turn the friggin' frogs gay. Do you understand that? Turn the friggin' frogs gay. Serious crap. Gay. Frogs, friggin' frogs. It's not funny. I'm gonna say it real slow for you. Gay. Frogs. Won't you fight for your life? Gay. Frogs, friggin' frogs. I don't like the frogs. Gay. Friggin' frogs. Frogs. Friggin' frog crap. Won't you fight the frogs? It's not funny. I'm gonna say it real slow for you. Frogs. Place point.
In its 9 seasons on air, the office of Dunder Mifflin was run by 11 different regional managers.
Everybody, David Wallace and I have talked, and we have decided to promote Jim to the position of co-manager.
Some had their jobs for years, others for less than an hour. But the office never ran better in the rare times when there was no manager at all.
Unleash the power of the pyramid.
I get that this is just a comedy, but sometimes what makes this show so funny is how close to reality it gets at times. If a company is set up properly, people really can just come into work, do their job, and go home without layers of authority on top of them micromanaging their every move, getting in the way of actual business operations, and taking home the biggest salaries in the office. Bad management can ruin even the best ideas and end up costing their companies lots of money in the process.
It's true.
About $3 trillion a year according to recent studies, which is why some companies are starting to rethink if the hierarchical business structure is a thing of the past. A typical business management is responsible for choosing the direction of the company.
I declare bankruptcy!
Training their subordinates and providing them with the tools they need to move the company in that direction, rewarding employees if they excel in their work, and punishing employees that don't meet their standards. These 5 tasks encompass everything that a manager is responsible for, and they are all very important roles in running a successful business, so it's not like the role of a manager is redundant by default. But some companies are starting to realize that these 5 tasks can be done without a manager at all, often with better results. This isn't some socialist propaganda either. These are regular businesses trying to operate in the best way to maximize profits for their shareholders. Some of the organizations we will look at in this video are owned by billionaires who would not benefit at all from the rich being eaten. So it's time to learn how money works to find out if the companies of the future could be run without the managers from the past. This week's lesson was brought to you by Vessi. If you haven't heard of the brand Vessi, let me tell you why I've really started to love their sneakers. Vessi creates 100% waterproof sneakers that are great for the materials. Need to see that a managerless organization is possible and advantageous for shareholders. You not liking your boss is unfortunately not a good enough reason to change how a company operates, and a few of the managerless companies we will look at later are famous for being pretty terrible places to work anyway, so worker satisfaction is not going on the list. Apart from that, there are 4 big advantages to getting rid of managers that shareholders will actually care about. Number 1, it saves money. Businesses should always be trying to cut down on unnecessary expenses, and managers are typically paid more than the workers they are managing. If they can be removed, then that leaves more money to be paid back to the shareholders. This is the obvious one, but less companies think to do this than you might imagine. A 2016 report by the Harvard Business Review found that excess management was costing the states $3 trillion per year. That's like removing the state of California and Texas and making them micromanage each other. But why would profit-driven companies do this? Well, managers are normally the first people consulted about incoming layoffs, and they are also the people tasked with deciding who leaves and who stays. They are obviously not going to pick themselves, even if they are the person in their team that contributes the least. As you go higher up the corporate ladder, it becomes worse because managers start to look out for people directly below them. The anthropologist David Graeber spoke about this in his book Bullshit Jobs, where he singled out people that only exist in organizations to make their superiors feel important.
So how on earth do you have a situation where private firms are making up jobs where they pay people not to do anything? Now that's exactly the last thing you'd think that a competitive firm would do.
Graeber specifically spoke about receptionists, administrative assistants, and doormen, but middle managers can become flunkies of their own. A senior manager delegates to middle managers, who delegate to team leaders, who delegate to staff. If this chain of command doesn't exist, then the senior managers will just be regular managers, and that simply can't be allowed to happen. One of the first things that most private equity companies do after they take over a business is strip out a lot of management, and it's rare to say that this has any downside effects on the company. Number 2, it removes single points of failure. Managers will either knowingly or unknowingly make themselves needless keyholders in a business. If you work in an office, think of how many tasks you have done a million times before, but still need a manager's sign-off every time. Technology has only made this worse, as now operations on company systems are tied to managers' logged-in details. Sometimes staff shouldn't be allowed to do certain things, and we are not talking about making the company payroll account open to all employees, but that doesn't involve management anyway. I used to work at an investment bank, and I am not allowed to say too much about what I did there. But a big part of my job was making SIPs, or confidential information presentations, which are fancy documents to send to potential buyers, which are packed full of information they need to know about a company they are considering buying. I made countless SIPs in my career, but every time I needed to print, I needed my MD to sign off on it, even if it was a draft. Even if it would never be looked at by anybody external from the business. I am sure you have all had very similar experiences before. If managers are ever asked about what they do around the office, a common responsibility they are unironically proud of is signing off on things. Hierarchical management also creates single points of failure if someone is incompetent or corrupt.
The corporate hierarchy is just an extension of the human need for status and authority.
Advantage number 3, it helps workers stay on task. This one might sound a bit counterintuitive, but let me explain. The job of a good manager is pretty easy, and unless they themselves or their manager gives them lots of meaningless tasks to do, it's very hard to fill up a 40-hour work week with tasks that could be classified as managing. The average manager is responsible for 4.7 subordinates. If a manager was directly managing all equally, that would mean more than 8 hours per week per worker, which is time taken away from their tasks. So either these managers are wasting their subordinates' time, or they are finding ways to fill their own to make themselves look busy. Some managers mix up their time by actually engaging in the same work as their team. This can be an effective form of leadership, but sometimes it can just cause problems if the manager is just a manager and doesn't have the skills needed to do the job they oversee. Graeber talks about the taskmaster. Taskmasters come in 2 distinct varieties: the ones who tell their underlings what to do, and the ones who actively invent pointless tasks just to make sure they can say they have contributed something. The first variety is only pointless if employees in a company would not stay on task without active supervision. In the age of quiet quitting, that may make you think that these managers are essential, but there are other ways to keep people on task that doesn't involve paying people to stand over others with a stopwatch. The second variety, the ones that make up pointless tasks, can be very damaging to a company. How much time do you waste at your job going through appraisals, reviews, assessments, and meetings that could have been in an email, also that your manager has something to put in their calendar? That's time that you are not spending making shareholders money. Advantage number 4, it reduces staff turnover. According to a recent study conducted by Dr. Brian Robinson, the top reason for people leaving their job was poor pay, with 59% of respondents citing this as the reason they resigned. But just behind that, 56% said that poor management was what made them quit. People rarely quit jobs. They quit managers, which is not surprising when you find out that most managers do not receive any formal management training, and most only got their jobs because they were good at non-management roles they had before. Being good at sales, programming, or any other operational job is an entirely different skill set from being a good manager. Sometimes companies get lucky, but not always. The Dilbert principle is the trend for people who are good at their jobs to be promoted until they get to a job that they are no longer good at. I know I have used this example before, but Michael Scott is the best portrayal of this principle ever put to screen. He demonstrated that he was a fantastic salesman that made a lot of money for his company, so he became the logical choice to run the branch when his boss Ed Truck retired. He was not suited to management and ended up causing all the management problems on our list. He would waste people's time, he would cause great damage to the business, and he would do all this while taking home the largest paycheck in the office.
Welcome, 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 welcome. You are all jerks.
Because he was so terrible at his job, he was never going to be promoted again. But the company also believed he had earned his job, so he also continued to barely avoid getting fired. So his poor employees were stuck with him. And this exact situation is far from a work fiction in offices all around the world.
You are the reason I drink. You are the reason I live to forget.
The only reason Michael did not cause more staff turnover was because this was a TV show that needed a consistent cast. In the real world, if people get stuck with a terrible manager who is never going to leave their position, then they quit their job because it's the only escape. Hierarchical management structures also cause staff turnover for a different reason too. Ambitious workers who want to climb the corporate ladder will quickly learn that switching jobs is the fastest way to get a promotion. This is a great strategy for the worker, but it's terrible for the companies because they need to invest money into hiring and training an employee only for them to deliver 2 years worth of service and move on. If a company had no defined hierarchy of management, then workers wouldn't feel as if their career had stagnated because they were passed over for a promotion. Promotions themselves wouldn't exist, so there wouldn't be that motivation to move on. But don't take my word for it. Let's look at some real-world examples of businesses that have made a managerless structure work. You probably think I'm about to start talking about worker co-ops now, and they are a great example. Worker co-ops employ around 20% of the entire world's workforce and are often incredibly successful operations for their owners, who are also the employees. These are often businesses in cottage industries which have a reputation for being a bit alternative, selling organic, tofu-coated, solar power, throw rugs out of their community centers. But these are not the businesses I want to talk about. Instead, I want to start with Renaissance Technologies, which is a hedge fund. Precisely the last business you would expect to do away with rigid management structures.
This is probably the single most successful hedge fund in the history of the industry in terms of its performance record.
Renaissance, and particularly the Medallion Fund, is the most successful hedge fund in history. It delivered an annualized return of 39% after fees between 1988 and 2018. That is 4 times the market return, which is already very good. Just $1,000 invested into this fund at the beginning of that period would be worth $100 million today. The Medallion Fund achieved these returns by employing the world's smartest statisticians, mathematicians, and computer scientists to build computer models to predict the stock market before computer modeling was even possible. Nobody outside the firm knows quite what they get up to these days, and that's exactly how they like it. Renaissance cut off outside investors from their Medallion Fund in the early 90s, and now the business only invests the money of the people that work at the company. The people they hire also get access to all the company's price data and computer models, so they need to make sure that the people stay around, or else their market-beating formulas would eventually leak out to other investors, which would render them useless. The company was able to attract such amazing talent and keep them around long-term because it's effectively run as a workers' co-op. The fund is run for the benefit of the members, who are the employees, and nobody is above anybody else when it comes to official authority. There are people that work at this fund that are more experienced, more respected, and are paid more than others. But their ideas are all treated equally, and nobody can say that something will or will not be done because they are the boss. If you Google Renaissance, you will notice that it still has a management structure and a CEO. But those individuals are mostly there for compliance reasons and to perform certain roles that must be given an official title in an investment firm. The CEO and the first-year analysts all get the same decision-making authority when it comes to how the fund deploys its capital. If the role of a manager is to choose the direction of a company, train their subordinates, and provide them with the tools they need to move the company in that direction, reward employees that excel in their work, and punish employees that don't meet their standards, it's worth seeing how the most successful hedge fund in history completed these tasks without managers. When it comes to training, Renaissance had a very particular philosophy. You can teach someone a job, but you can't teach someone to be smart. The company would often hire people like astrophysicists and world-class chess players and teach them about trading on Wall Street. This training was done collaboratively, and the company took the same approach to developing trading algorithms as scientists would take when working on an experiment. They would draw different expertise from different people, and everybody would slowly learn how they all fit together. Of course, it probably helped that most of the people that worked there actually were scientists. In our own offices, I am sure most of you have learned more about your job from your peers than you have through management-run exercises or seminars. Rewarding high-performing employees and punishing underperformers is something that Renaissance doesn't talk too openly about. The kinds of people that qualify for a job at Renaissance are always going to be brilliant in their field and extremely driven to solve problems. But people still do get fired. It's normally because the employees have collectively forced them out. But working without a manager can be a huge motivator. Letting down the boss is not nearly as bad to most people as letting down a group of their peers. I know I have put more dedication into training for a soccer final than I have into preparing pitch decks, even though soccer is something I do just for fun, and pitch decks used to be how I avoided homelessness. The fear of letting down your team is more powerful than the fear of being fired. Choosing company direction was also a joint effort. An investment fund has a pretty clear goal: make as much money as possible. But employees all decided on what strategies the company would use, what markets they would trade in, and even what investors they would bring on board. You might think that this would make Renaissance a great place to work, but most accounts say the exact opposite. The strong personalities of people who are the best in their fields all working together for long hours in a high-stress industry can cause countless arguments. But even despite that, the company has had staff turnover measured in decades and still managed to be the most successful investment fund of all time. And if that's not a ringing endorsement for the redundancy of dedicated managers, then nothing will be. But maybe we as humans just can't do away with social hierarchies. After all, we only ever learn about the rulers throughout history, which begs the questions. Why do historians only care about rich people? Fortunately, I have answered this question over on my new channel, How History Works. And a special thank you again to Vessi for making it possible for everybody to keep on learning how money works.
People say I am the best boss. They go, God, we've never worked in a place like this before. You're hilarious. And you get the best out of us. I think that pretty much sums it up.
This week's video is sponsored by HubSpot. I don't need to tell you about all of the problems with celebrity culture, but America has a more damaging obsession that most people instinctively root for. Entrepreneur culture is costing everybody a lot of money, even if they never start a business of their own.
Today, thanks to the economic strategy, more small businesses are being created, and small businesses are creating more jobs faster than ever before.
I would rather work 80 hours a week to make $50K and work for myself than have a $75,000, $100,000 job working for somebody else.
Last year, Americans started 5 million new businesses, a 42% increase from pre-pandemic levels. Despite job market uncertainties and rising interest rates, more people than ever believe now is the right time to start a business. The pressure from online thought leaders has pushed the narrative that trying to start a business has never been easier, never been more profitable, and even if you fail, you will be right back to where you started anyway. In a survey conducted by the HR and payroll platform Gusto, 1,600 new entrepreneurs were questioned about their motivations for starting a business. Being burned out at work and feeling the pain of inflation were the top responses. This is a dangerous trend that will leave most new business owners worse off than when they started, but entrepreneurship is still promoted as something that is a responsible way to fix these problems. Unsurprisingly, that's causing 3 big issues that will be costing you money, even if you aren't personally on your #grindset yet. The first problem is that most people simply suck at business. The largest demographic increase in new business owners was young people between 18 and 35. According to a study by the Harvard Business Review using US Census Bureau data, the average age of a successful startup founder at the time of launching their company was 42 years old. Founders below the age of 30 had a significantly higher rate of failure, and yet the top Google suggestion below this article was, is it too late to start a business after 30? A founder's experience and industry connections will play a big part in a new business's success. Between 1 in 5 to 1 in 3 startups fail within the first year, but there are some businesses that started by people with decades of industry experience that are almost guaranteed to be successful. A well-respected expert with a long list of clients that they can bring into their new business on day 1 will have a much higher likelihood of success than someone who started a business because they wanted to be their own boss and make a lot of money. Experts going into business for themselves to provide a service in a field they have worked in for decades represents a significant portion of new businesses, so that means that people that just want to be business people doing business things are going to have even worse odds. Businesses in trendy fields like tech, e-commerce, hospitality, and fashion have a significantly higher failure rate than finance, construction, and healthcare, where business owners are required to have industry experience and accreditations before they are even allowed to start operating. But if you are thinking about starting a business, you probably already know about the failure rate, and you are still wanting to give it a go either because you do have a solid business plan or because every piece of media has told you how amazing business owners are. What you might not know is why it's so important that you think this way. So it's time to learn how money works to find out why most people shouldn't be entrepreneurs, even when everybody says it's the greatest thing ever. This week's lesson was sponsored by HubSpot. I know many of you watching are business owners yourselves and know that being an entrepreneur is actually very hard work. You know the tools for being a successful entrepreneur don't come from a long post from some hustle bro on Twitter telling people how to become a millionaire by dropshipping. Instead, you read reports from reputable sources like the State of Marketing from HubSpot. The report covers trends in email, content, and video marketing from leading experts and delivers insights on how you can adapt your marketing strategies to work in this new media environment. As many of you know, I've launched my newsletter Compounded Daily, and honestly, I'm learning as I'm going. Yet, the HubSpot email marketing trends provided me incredibly valuable insights such as to prioritize accessibility, use hyper-personalization, conduct sentiment polls with your audience, and much more. These valuable insights are not just interesting points, they're actual action items that I can use to help me grow my email newsletter. There's so much more you can take away from this report, and I highly recommend it to anybody that's serious about their business or company. Use my link in the description to start diving deeper into the state of marketing. The first reason why you subconsciously believe that you should be trying to start a business is that hustle bros are pushing you products that make starting a business look easy, but it's not. There is nothing wrong with companies marketing a competitive service to people who are in the market for that service. It only becomes dangerous when people are encouraged to enter the market when they find they had no intention to start a business in the first place. Everybody from boss babe MLM marketing to political campaigns hinge on making small business owners feel special, and those who aren't feel like they should be starting their business right now. People are willing to spend a lot of money on products that they think are going to help them start or improve their business, so companies want to push as many people into that market as possible. This market is highly lucrative and highly competitive. According to a 2021 study by the market data firm Straits Research, this market was worth $1.48 trillion in 2021 and is projected to be worth $8 trillion by 2030. These services typically have high margins and customers to keep their services for a long time because it becomes integral to their business operations, and the cost and downtime required to switch to a competitor just isn't worth it. The biggest barrier to these businesses is getting new customers into their service. Cloud storage and web hosting, for example, is a huge market dominated by three players: Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud. Signing up big customers to these services is still handled by old-school sales managers, who will earn a commission for every new client they sign up. That combination of technical skills and interpersonal sales ability means that top-performing reps can earn more than $1 million a year in commission. All of these companies have also invested millions into data storage devices to make migrating from one service to another as painless as possible for the few companies that do want to make the switch to a competitor. Amazon even has a data center on wheels that can hold up to 100 petabytes of data to migrate a company's storage to one of their data centers because it's faster to drive that much data across the country than it is to send it over the internet. It's a big business with big expenses, but it has equally big rewards for securing new clients. Although, it's a lot easier to just get new clients right as they start their business. Even if the deals are smaller, some of those companies grow. So a broad approach to potential new customers is a cost-effective way to onboard big customers in the future. Companies know if they provide a decent service at a fair price, most businesses are unlikely to switch over, so they will have a customer for life. Targeting people before they even start a business is a cheaper customer acquisition method than going after existing customers from competitors, but this whole system relies on making it look appealing to start a business that would use the company's products. Now, this is a perfectly legitimate marketing strategy carried out by perfectly legitimate companies with great products helping great businesses. But unfortunately, it has also been taken too far by hustle bros with a course to sell you on starting your own business. They have changed the well-crafted narrative from starting a business is a risk you should consider to if you don't start a business right now, you're a loser that's going to work a 9-to-5 their whole life. It's okay if you don't want to start your own business, and it's probably a good idea not to if you have to rely on a course to learn how to get started, which is the second problem with America's obsession with entrepreneurship. Starting a business comes first, solving a problem comes second. How many people do you think get listed every year on the Forbes 30 Under 30 list? Well, I don't know what your answer was because this is a video, but you're probably wrong because it's 600. The nonsensical naming convention is far from the worst problem with the list, with a suspicious number of former awardees ending up in prison for fraud. Sam Bankman-Fried, Caroline Ellison, Martin Shkreli, Do Kwon, and Charlie Javis have all at one point been featured on this prestigious list celebrating their entrepreneurship, and all subsequently ended up in prison. The one and only Patrick Boyle covered this recently, and it highlights a larger problem that young people are being encouraged, celebrated, and rewarded for starting businesses, even if those businesses make no sense.
A lot of the winners, in fact often the ones that seemed most impressive at the time, seem to end up going to prison.
People, especially young people, want to start a business without having the life experience to have seen industry problems that could be solved in a marketable way. There are always exceptions, but someone is much more likely to find a profitable solution to a problem if they have been dealing with that problem for their entire career. Gary Tan is the CEO of Y Combinator, a startup incubator that gives seed investments to very early stage startups and also provides training to new entrepreneurs on how to run a business and how to find further investors. Tan has frequently said that the best way to start a business is to work in an industry you're interested in, get paid to learn about that industry, find a problem, and then leave to solve that problem. Y Combinator's business model only works when people are creating new businesses, so this advice goes against his best interest, which is why exactly you should listen to it. The overly competitive state of venture capital has meant that even bad ideas get funded if the founders fit the mold of a disruptive creator that can be marketed effectively to further investors. Fake it till you make it is a popular expression, but honestly terrible business advice. A growing list of bad companies have changed, faking it until they make it, to fake it until they can drop it to the next group of investors with no intention of ever making anything in particular. Even businesses that don't fall in the sights of venture capitalists have the same problems on a smaller scale. People want to start a business, and they see that dropshipping or digital marketing could make it possible without considering what value, if any, they are providing to their market. If you want to start a business, a good sign is if you can't believe that nobody has ever thought of your idea before. A bad sign is if you are taking someone else's idea because it looks like it made them a lot of money, or even worse, they told you it made them a lot of money. With those problems in mind, the second reason so many people still want to start their own business is because modern corporate jobs are highly demanding and being your own boss is sold as a way to take back control of your life. Work-life balance is extremely important, and it's a big reason I quit investment banking to become a full-time YouTuber, much to the disappointment of my parents. But for most people, starting a business is going to mean much less free time. A survey by the publication Inc. of American small business owners found that the majority of them worked at least 50 hours a week, with 25% working more than 60 hours a week. Additionally, 70% of respondents say they had worked weekends on a regular basis. Once a business is at scale, an effective founder can slowly offload responsibilities, but that is an incredibly difficult process at a stage that most businesses never get to. Business owners may not answer to a boss, but they answer to their customers, their own staff, business regulators, and suppliers. If you decide to go into business for yourself, you will also have more personal investment in your job. If you want to take a break from a normal job, you may be able to organize vacation days, or you can simply quit and find a new job. It's a big decision, but you will only miss out on income. It won't directly cost you a major investment. If you run your own business, taking a break means shutting the business down until you get back, if it can be restarted at all. The final problem with the cultural obsession with entrepreneurship is that it is used as an excuse to gloss over a lot of bad practices in the name of progress. Some of the fraudulent businesses that were started by entrepreneurs that just wanted to be big business people doing big business people things have cost investors and clients billions of dollars. Others have put people's health at risk, and others have been reckless to the point of being deadly. Move fast and break things is another common expression amongst dumb startup founders. It's a term borrowed from programming where the best way to test something is to throw code together until it breaks and fix what went wrong. The phrase is an internal motto for the early days of Facebook, and it was an inside joke amongst developers to talk about shitty code that still did the job. Facebook itself changed this motto in 2014 to move fast with sustainable infrastructure, but the damage has been done. Now, everybody that fancies themselves the next visionary sees rules and regulations as nothing more than obstacles to be skirted around. It's barely acceptable practice for a tech company where the worst thing that can happen is service outages, but it's criminal behavior when it involves people's livelihood or their health and safety. Theranos, OceanGate, and FTX are just the failures we have heard about, but our obsession with entrepreneurship has let stuff like this happen for far too long. Red tape exists for a reason. Most of the health and safety regulations in America can be linked back to just one accident in 1904 that was unsurprisingly caused by opportunistic businessmen trying to cut corners to get their enterprise afloat. Go and watch my other video over on how history works to find out about the greatest tragedy in New York up until the attacks of 9/11. If you want to get these videos a day early and get daily articles that will never be made into videos on YouTube, then subscribe to my email newsletter Compounded Daily. And thanks again to HubSpot for making it possible for everybody to keep on learning how money works. This video was sponsored by HubSpot. A good CEO can build an average company into $1 billion success, and a bad CEO can destroy even a strong company in less than a year.
Legend of Total War here, and today Creative Assembly posted a blog on the Siege Proving Ground. So this will give people an opportunity to opt into it, check out the changes they want to make, and then maybe based on feedback, this will be put into a major patch, maybe 6.3 later down the track. So what I'm going to go through is mainly just their ideas, give some feedback, what I think about these ideas, and I'd love to hear your ideas as well. Because obviously if they want to do something and we think it's a bad idea, it's a good opportunity to say so that they don't do it, because they're going to base it based on feedback. Not just feedback from people that play it, but also from comments and forums and everything. So it's a good time to have your voice heard if you want it. All of the stuff is always optional. So yeah, I'm just going to just give my thoughts in this video, as we usually do with these sort of blog videos, and love to hear your thoughts as well. So the sieges with Total War Warhammer 3 has always been a major problem, probably one of the biggest blights on the game. It's really terrible foundation that they brought in from Total War Warhammer 1, which was brought into Total War Warhammer 2. People complained about it a lot. They sucked. And then in Warhammer 3, they kind of attempted to tackle it, but they didn't do a very good job of it, with the walls still being crap, the butt ladders, and the supply system with being able to spawn these towers like a siege defense game. None of it was well received. It's one of those things where you can pretty much rally the entire community behind you and be like, yeah, the entirety of the community, by like a handful of people, like, yeah, the sieges in Total War Warhammer 3 suck. It's one of the few things that you can actually get unanimous support behind, but more or less. So it's good they're finally getting to it again. They've made some adjustments here and there throughout Warhammer 3, like not being able to capture the main capture point unless you've also captured the semi-main capture point, because you used to just be able to sneak in and capture either one of them, and then you just win the battle that way, because AI would just basically just not care that you captured one of their points, because especially with stalking units. And so just sieges just used to be totally ridiculous. They still kind of are. It's just they've toned it down a little bit. Walls are still a massive problem because they're basically useless thanks to butt ladders, but it looks like they're going to tackle that. So it seems as though the Proving Grounds beta, you'll be able to log into that from the 24th of July to the 7th of August. It is entirely up to you if you want to do it. It's completely optional, but it gives you an opportunity to try out some sieges and see what they're doing. And if you don't like what they're doing, you can send them feedback and maybe they'll make some tweaks. It's probably one of those things that they're never going to get perfect in Total War Warhammer 3, but improvements is still better than nothing. And I kind of suspect that this might be one of the reasons why the DLC is getting delayed. It does seem as though there's a lot more focus on improving the core gameplay that's currently playable and not leaving huge portions of the game in a really terrible state, even though it's been that way for years now. And rather than add new content, which I'm all for. I mean, we're apparently getting some reworks for Lizardmen and Tomb Kings. I'm looking forward to that. And if they make some improvements to sieges, that's great. But I'm also kind of just not really invested in sieges at all. So we'll see what happens. But let's go through the siege rework here. This was basically just an introduction to what it was all about. And then it looks like the guy from CA Sophia is tackling this issue here. So the number one issue, removal of, it's calling it pocket ladders. Nobody calls it pocket ladders. They call it butt ladders or ass ladders or ass ladders or whatever. So obviously he can't put that into the blog. But yeah, pocket ladders, we know what he's talking about. So what we changed, the biggest change that will be focused on the most in this update is the removal of so-called pocket ladders, which nobody calls pocket ladders, which allowed most infantry units to put, actually all, unless it's a monstrous infantry, all infantry units can do it. With there are actually like one or two exceptions. If it's like Skarsnik, for example, he can't use pocket ladders. Neither can Festus the Leech Lord. Neither can weapons team units like Rattling Guns. They can't do it. But they're like weird because they're like multi-entity in a single entity sort of thing. Weird case, but anyway. So most infantry units to pull a siege ladder out of nothing and climb the walls of a settlement. In the Proving Ground, that is not going to be the case, and players and the AI, of course, will need to rely on different tactics to overcome the defenses of a well-fortified settlement. So it just depends, I suppose, on how you look at this, but the AI, at least for my campaigns, are the ones that use the arse ladders way more than I do. I usually try to go in through a gate. That being said, I cheese sieges. Like, let's be real, I cheese the sieges. I have no interest in fighting them fairly. I usually try to win my sieges with like one or two heroes. I can usually do that. I usually don't need to do like an all-out assault. So I'm not sending my infantry lines to climb up on the walls that way because it's just not really efficient. Usually what I do, if I'm going to use infantry and I have to get into the settlement, I will sneak around to find an undefended section of their wall, send one guy up through the ladders, open the gates, and then get everyone else in through that section. But the AI doesn't do that. I wonder what's going to happen now without arse ladders. Will ladders just not be in the game, or will ladders start where they'll be able to carry it, or be ladders like from Rome 2 where they're like a really small, low-tech siege tower sort of, and you just slowly push them up to the wall, starting off with 4 or whatever it is they want to do with it. Be interesting to see, because they don't go into too much detail with this. So why we changed it? Because everybody hates it. That's the only thing they need to say here. Everybody universally hates arse ladders, I think. There's always going to be like one or two people be like, not me, I think the arse ladders are perfect the way they are. Always going to get it. You're never going to get 100% consensus on anything. The sky is blue. No, legend, it's actually... water is wet. No, legend, it's actually... You know, no matter what it is, no matter how obvious it is, you're always going to have somebody has to be the devil's advocate. Okay, so I just want to make that clear. You guys all know that. But I know there's got to be somebody that disagrees, so I just want to preempt it, so whatever. They're still going to get it. Anyway, there are 2 main reasons why we want to introduce this fundamental change to how sieges work in the game. Gameplay and immersion. Total War always strives to depict battles in a realistic way, and yes, in our world, dragons and giant flaming heads are counted as realistic. Okay, so on this note here, realistic within the how the world actually works. Like within Warhammer Fantasy, there's supposed to be magic, so yeah, we get that. Like dragons are supposed to do that. But I would say that Total War games in general, especially on the historical side of things, have become significantly less realistic on the battlefield in recent years. Probably achieving the most realistic battles were in like Shogun 2, I guess, or even Rome 1 and Medieval 2, because you took a lot of artillery to break down a section of wall. You could climb off the wall. If they're standing on the wall, they fall off. Units wouldn't run out of the city when they broke. They would run into the city to go and fight to the death at the last spot. There was loads of realism. Like you had to manually move the towers up to the wall. They could climb up the wall through the towers, out through the ladders, and actually climb back down the walls. All this kind of stuff. A lot of this stuff has been lost along the way. With Total War, and it's just been sort of dumbed down. Like, for example, reload animations was a big thing with Warhammer 1. I think they've started doing a little bit more with reload animations. I don't really check it that much, but I remember with like Thunderers, they would just basically stand there and then just shoot again, but there was no reload animation. Whereas you go back to Medieval 2 as an example, and the gun units, when you finally got access to them, they sit there bloody reloading for like 5 minutes, doing the whole animation, and then do the same thing. Same thing with Empire Total War. You had the whole reload animation. Same thing with the cannons as well. And then Warhammer, they just cut that out. It's like, well, we don't need... It's not realistic in a fantasy world to reload the cannon. They just magically put the cannon in there, as the dwarves. So I think that was largely done for, cutting corners for budget reason. But Total War battles in general are probably the most realistic depiction of a battle that you're going to see anywhere else. Maybe Manor Lords might be able to do something with it, but it's too small scale now to really, at this stage, to really say it's a Total War competitor. But we'll see how that goes. All projectiles are physically simulated. Shields are providing protection only from the front. Types of hit reactions are based on relation between the impact force, which is different from damage of the attacker, and the mass of the defender. So an example of this that I'm thinking of is like if you have Scarbrand and you charge through a unit of infantry, and it's not your weapon strength that's taken into consideration, but the relative difference in mass while you're charging dishes out the damage. Same thing as if you like knock a person off a hill and they fall far enough, they break their neck and die. So this is something that is more frequently seen in Total War Warhammer compared to Warhammer 3 compared to Warhammer 2, for example. Even though it's not perfect and there are many aspects that can be improved, we believe that the ability to pull a huge ladder out of your ass can be quite immersion breaking for the players, and it takes away from the more strategic planning of the battle. In addition, this makes walls almost obsolete. This is the main thing that I had a problem with. It does make... There's just no point to the walls. If the walls are no hindrance whatsoever to the attacker, and in fact, they're actually kind of a hindrance to the defender, because if you've got units that are fighting in melee up on the wall, and you've got some archer units down on the ground, you can't really shoot up at the wall to do anything. Also, the towers don't shoot sideways, so they don't fire at the defender. So there's no real advantage to fighting up on the walls. So the only advantage is just use the towers, and then as soon as they're past the towers, they just get up on the wall. You just give up the wall straight away, which is completely immersion breaking, because that would have never fucking happened in any battle whatsoever. They just give up the walls straight away because the walls are fucking useless. It's the towers that were useful, not the walls. And every single unit in the game can break down the gate without a battering ram. This makes walls almost obsolete, allows enemies to bypass them with ease while making the defending choke points inside the settlement the obvious choice. This is not how we want sieges to feel. I really doubt that they're going to be able to fix this just with removal of pocket ladders. It will definitely help so that infantry, if they do manage to get up on the ladder, they'll have to concentrate up certain areas, which will make it easier for you to keep them in the choke points at the wall so you can focus on the towers firing longer. So it definitely will help, but I still think that fighting up on the walls is probably still not going to be particularly favorable for the players, especially if you're playing with any sense of like AI cheats, which I know most of you guys don't, but if you do, it still won't feel good to fight on the walls, probably. How will these changes affect you in the game? These changes will make your strategic decisions more important. I think it means tactical decisions. Strategic decisions are on the campaign map. Much more important, and have you plan your approach or defense of a siege more carefully. And if you don't like them and prefer to get the slaughter faster, you can always turn the pocket ladders back on the options menu. Just make sure you do that before you actually get into the battle. I don't look. I'm mixed thoughts about this. I think having it optional is definitely good, but I think sometimes they can give you too many options. It's like, make a fucking decision on how you want the game to play. And I guess the problem here is that the game has been played this way for 9 years, and now they're taking it away. And some people are just going to be too set in their ways and be like, well, I don't want this change. I'm not used to change. I just don't want this patch to happen. And so giving them the option to do that. I mean, with CA Sophia, they're pretty good at giving you loads of different ways to play the campaign. But for me personally, I just want them to design how they want it to make the game, make it a default, and then just add like 3 different difficulty options, and then that's it. And I don't want to have to click all these different buttons. You know, the same thing with like the endgame crises and stuff. I just turn all that shit off for the most part, because it's just a waste of time for me when I'm trying to play for fun. So I personally will probably just leave it off and then never untake it. I'm curious to you guys, how many of you guys are going to leave the pocket, now I'm calling it pocket ladders, how many of you guys are going to leave the butt ladders on so that you'll still have access to essentially the old system? Anyway, siege equipment rebalance. What we've changed and why we've changed it. The removal of pocket ladders requires a ton of other changes to make sure the game functions without them. The siege equipment availability has been rebalanced, and players will now be able to field more siege towers and battering rams in siege battles to compensate for the lack of ladders. So it's still just the 2 siege equipment that you can purchase. You don't have access to ladders. I think that's lame if that's the case. Like, you're just removing it from the game. Because, like, in Rome 2, they introduced, you besiege a settlement, and you could attack it immediately. You have 4 ladders, and these were slow to move up. They're sort of like weak siege towers. And I believe they brought that back for Total War Pharaoh. So couldn't you add that back in quite easily for Total War Warhammer 3, like add those kind of ladders in? Or make it so that, I mean, carrying the ladders up to the wall like they did in, like, Medieval 2, I probably don't expect them to do that. I think some people would like that. I don't know. I don't know what the solution is to that. So there'll be more available. So instead of making 1 or 2 per turn, you might be able to make 3 or 4 to compensate for not having arse ladders. Stats like speed and durability of that equipment have also been changed to make them more effective at their intended functions. In addition, we are changing the way siege attrition works and turning it into a linear progression, making it be stronger and stronger with each consecutive turn a settlement remains under siege. That's interesting, because currently it's like you just lose at base 10% of your troops every single turn. So if you had 100, it would go down to 90, then it would go down to 80, 70, until you had none left. So based on what I'm interpreting here, is that maybe if you had 100 troops in a unit, it would go to 99, then to 97. And so basically each turn, the amount of casualties would go up more, but initially it takes a while before you actually start taking significant casualties. I definitely think that's a better system, but I still think what they did with Total War Attila was the best system, which they had in Warhammer 1 and... I don't know if they had it in Warhammer 1, it's been such a long time since I played, but they had it in Warhammer 2, where you get a certain amount of turns of grace before you start taking any attrition. Where you besiege a settlement, and it's like 3 turns or 4 turns before they'll take any attrition whatsoever. And then once they start taking attrition, it's like a couple of turns and it's over. I kind of like that system better, because that way you had time to bring in a relief force to try to lift the siege, as opposed to just constantly getting whittled down. Because this system that's currently in, you're sort of incentivized to, if it's possible, sally out and just prevent the siege from letting them kill off 50% of your army if you've got no hope of bringing in reinforcements in a reasonable amount of time. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see how that goes, but usually I don't let the sieges go on for very long, personally. Okay, so how will these changes affect you in the game? Players will now need less manpower to construct siege equipment, which means it'll be more readily available when sieging settlements. On the other hand, settlements are going to be a tad less susceptible to siege attrition in the early stages of the siege, while taking less overall turns to fully succumb to it. So yeah, again, the base time at the moment is 10 turns, so what does that mean, like 5 turns? And there's obviously various things you can do to modify it. So defensive adjustments, what we've adjusted. We adjusted the stats of the defensive towers and gates. Towers will now be slightly deadlier, but have much shorter range, while gates will be more durable when it comes to attacks from regular and some monstrous infantry, but less so against battering rams. This is probably the right call, and it will definitely negatively impact on how I siege, which I don't have a problem with, because it's too easy for me. Because I never make battering rams. What for? Every unit is a battering ram. What do you need battering rams for? It's a redundant construction. So they've already done this once before in Total War Warhammer 3. They've actually made the gates more durable, which just basically meant it took longer to get in there, which wasn't that big of a deal unless you were trying to rush in. But what I would do to sort of counter this is that I would just go knock down the gate in one area. Obviously, it would take a while, and they would bring their forces over to defend that position. And then once I've knocked down the gate, I'd be like, well, I'm not going in through here. And I'll just run off to a different section of the wall and start knocking down a different gate. And then their army goes all the way back over to that section of the gate that I'm now starting to knock down. And then once they've fully committed over there, I just run back to the other gate that I first destroyed and just walk straight through, because I haven't repaired the gate. And didn't leave anyone behind, because I didn't anticipate that I was just going to go back until I could just run in through the gate. We'll see if this is just like a nuisance, or will it actually make battles like these sort of sieges more difficult. Because one of the things that the AI probably really should be able to do is actually shoot at you or drop rocks on you from above when you're trying to break down the gate, which currently they can't. If you've got like a single entity smashing down the gate, there are only a handful of units that, when standing above you, will be able to shoot down at you. The rest of them just go, well, we'll just wait until you're done, and just sit there and be like, well, we've got 16,000 health we got to knock down, and we're knocking it down 100 at a time. Okay, I'll see you in half an hour. And then just sit there and wait. Making the battle take longer is not making the battle better. So a big problem with some of these things here is that the AI needs to be able to respond and make it more urgent to get in there, because it currently isn't. I could just take my time and basically play these sieges one-handed because the AI is just so passive. But anyway. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see what happens with all that. But we'll have to wait until the actual patch to see if there's any meaningful changes with it. Well, we've changed it. Towers currently... Oh yeah, that's right, the towers as well. So this is probably not going to be much of a hindrance to me. I mean, they'll be deadlier, but I usually don't get shot by towers anyway, because I always stay at... Like, their current range is 350. Most artillery in the game has a higher range than 350. Well, there is quite a lot of them that have that, so I just shoot down the towers. It didn't mention if the towers are going to be more durable, so shooting them down with artillery might take up more ammo now. I'm not entirely sure. But whatever this much shorter range means, that just means that more types of artillery are now going to be able to shoot with impunity at these towers. Because, like, for example, if you were using a organ gun with the dwarfs, I'm pretty sure regular towers actually outrange a organ gun. And so your organ guns had to get within range of a tower and would get fired at a little bit. But you just put like a single entity out in front of them and they just draw that at the fire. So now maybe the organ guns will be able to shoot with impunity at those towers. Again, not entirely sure because they're not giving us an actual stat number here. But I think that overall this will make it easier for the player to assault, especially if you've got artillery in your army, but will make it more difficult for the AI since they're not trying to cheese the sieges. They don't sit there and bomb you into oblivion before launching the attack. They just go straight for it. So with them being able to get fewer units up on the walls quickly without the butt ladders and the towers being more deadly, there may be a lot more incentive to actually hold the walls, if for no other reason than for the towers absolutely just murdering the enemy forces. Now, he does say it's only slightly deadlier, so if it's a tier 1 tower, I don't expect it's going to just mow down people like it's World War I friggin' machine guns. But currently, like, tier 1 towers are, you know, they might kill 10 or 20 enemy infantry, but that's not really that impactful. It's the higher tier towers that really do a whole lot, and then they just don't fire fast enough. They don't get enough opportunity to shoot to make any meaningful damage throughout the battle, especially considering their firing arcs don't fire backwards or to the sides. So once you've gotten into their blind spots, well, that's it. That's the end of the towers, and that's always been a massive problem. They did fix it a little bit. Like in Warhammer 2, the towers were more narrow in what they could fire, and then they widened it a little bit with Warhammer 3, but they've still got blind spots everywhere, so that's just not that big of an issue. Okay, so why we change it? Towers currently feel quite annoying for the attacker when they start shooting immediately after deployment, leaving no room for maneuvers or executing strategic attack plans, while the gates feel like they can easily be breached by mundane infantry, making specialized equipment, like the battering ram, obsolete. Yeah, not my experience with it, I guess. I wouldn't say that the towers felt annoying because I knew what their ranges were. I just stood out of their range. There's actually only a couple of maps in the game where the towers have full coverage over your deployment zone. So think of like a dwarf settlement specifically, but there's a tiny little section in the corner where if you put all of your troops there, they actually can't. There's actually a little bit of a blind spot. But pretty much every other map in the game has got plenty of blind spots. So only if you deploy within their range would that be a nuisance, I suppose, but whatever. How will these changes affect you in the game? These changes will allow you to maneuver outside a settlement you are attacking without being harassed, or open up to opportunity for you to batter it with artillery more easily, while also making defender less helpless against direct fast infantry attacks. Well, this is true in the first place. That's true right now. So I don't know what game he's playing. There's only a couple of, like, 1 or 2 maps where that is actually a struggle. Everywhere else, there's plenty of deployment zones where there's nothing being able to shoot at you. So maybe it'll help the player more when defending, not necessarily making attacking more difficult. Battle AI improvements. So we can't just remove pocket ladders without teaching the battle AI how to play without them. This, I think, was the main reason why they didn't do it up until now. This was the main excuse. So basically, if you take away butt ladders, the AI is just like, well, I'm been programmed to do this, and now I can't do it anymore. What do I do? So they've had to go in and fix over 50 issues related to it, apparently. So for the proving grounds, we fixed over 50 issues related to how the battle AI plays or reacts to certain situations on both the attacking and defending side of sieges. As some of those are not completely related to pocket ladders, these changes will be present even if the pocket ladders are turned on from the option menu. We'll see what those changes are going to be like. But anyway, why we changed it. Battle AI has always been tricky to get right, but that is most obvious in sieges, and we are really trying to make it play better and react to the player's actions in a more realistic way. We are not saying that we have fixed the battle AI, but hopefully with these improvements it will behave a lot more convincingly and offer a more interesting challenge. Well, we'll have to wait and see with that. The AI is definitely the biggest problem, I think, when it comes to sieges. because it's just awful. Especially when defending a siege, just sit there. They don't know what to do. And there's just so many ways to sneak in and screw them over. In many ways, walled city sieges are the easiest battles to play, as long as you have like a couple of units that just are not affected by the siege issues, like a flying spellcaster or something like that. A lord or a hero on a horse, you just like run around the city and their garrison is just, they can't catch you, sort of thing. It's hilarious the first 100 times, but it's not so funny now. But anyway, how will these changes affect the game? These changes will offer less weird behavior from the battle AI during sieges and allow it to be able to be play the game without the use of populators. Yeah, look, yeah, maybe less, but I'd be very surprised if I wasn't able to get the AI to do some real stupid shit pretty damn quickly with whatever changes. They're never going to be able to get the AI to be able to be as like good as a player, and I'm not expecting that. So my expectations on this stuff here is not particularly high, and that's fine. At least they're attempting it. Siege map improvements. What we've changed. With this update, we're also starting an initiative of reworking old siege maps to make them play and feel better. For now, we have only done 3, one for Skaven, Empire, and Orcs, but there will be more to come in the future after getting your feedback on them. Okay, here's an idea as well. One thing that they said in an early blog of Total War Warhammer 3, which ended up being a complete lie, surprise, surprise, they said that there would be such a huge variety of maps that you would go through an entire play session and not encounter the same map more than once. Bullshit. Okay, because it's just not true whatsoever. You will fight, basically Skaven maps, there is only one map for walled city sieges for Skaven. They've only got one. And you will fight the same one every single time. And in many instances, the map might have, within a particular culture, 2 or maybe 3 at the most different instances of like a different map, and many of those maps are reskinned. So for example, there is a high elf map and a greenskin map that are only aesthetically different but functionally identical. The layout is exactly the same, the everything's placement is exactly the same. It's just that one has high elf buildings and one has greenskin buildings, and that's not what I would call variety of maps. So if they add more variety of maps, I think that's also really good, because basically once you've figured out a map's weak points, which isn't really that difficult, every time that you go up against that particular map, which you will over the course of a campaign many, many, many times, because there's only, in total, 10? There's not that many. It makes it so that it becomes very predictable, and that's the problem with these sieges as well. It's like, oh, it's this map again? Well, I'll just do this exact same thing I did in the previous battle. Oh, it's this map again? Okay, we'll just do the exact same thing. And putting in more maps with more different challenges will hopefully vary that up a bit, so that people, in my opinion, don't get that level of siege fatigue that at least I experience with these sieges. It's just not interesting fighting the exact same siege map over and over and over again. But anyway, siege maps can often feel a little too cramped with little space to maneuver both inside and outside the settlements. With our reworks, we're looking to open up those maps a bit, allowing more approaches to the victory points. So this is only a problem if you're using massive armies. This is why I would usually say, like, siege defenses are only worth fighting. Well, not only worth fighting, but they're easier to defend if you actually have a smaller army going up against a smaller army. But as soon as the AI is bringing like 4 full stacks and you've got 2 full stacks inside the settlement, it gets so cramped and your units just don't fight as well. There just isn't enough space to utilize in those situations. And those are the more common scenarios, especially in the later stages of the campaign. So yeah, if they can open things up a little bit more in some areas, that'd be good. Then it says, what's cooking? Everything we've listed here are just the first steps for us to get sieges where we want them to be. And we are looking at this as a long-lasting effort to improve the game. In future, we have a wish list of possible options to explore, such as introducing ladders as a new construct. Okay, so they don't have ladders as a constructible building anymore. Basically, this has just been removed from the game, but they're possibly going to add it back later. Rebalancing the way garrisons work and what units are available to them from all factions. Changing the way that the buildings of towers or barracks, a barricade works, as well as more battle AI and pathfinding upgrades. Pathfinding upgrades would be great. One big thing is it'd be great if the gates are open, that units would actually prioritize going through the gate. It's just like, hey, I want you, who's standing right outside the gate, to go to the other side of the gate. Okay, bro. I'll go up the ladder. No, dude, the gate's open. You just need to walk through the door. No, I'll go up the ladder. It's like, fuck you, man. Go through the damn gate. You know, we've all suffered this problem. And you got to babysit them, and you can even tell when you like just put them in one at a time. You can tell them to go ladder, right? No, gate. And it's so fucking frustrating because just go through the fucking gate. It's not hard. Every other fucking Total War game could do it, for the most part, and that would be really good pathfinding upgrades. I think that's a big problem with Warhammer 3. They didn't have this problem as much in Warhammer 2. There's always been some degree of pathfinding issues, but Warhammer 3 specifically got some real bad pathfinding problems. In many ways, Warhammer 3 is a technical downgrade on Total War Warhammer 2. The way that units function and the way that the game plays out on just like an individual battle and campaign level is actually inferior to Warhammer 2. They still haven't caught up after all these years. Because in Warhammer 2, units were more responsive, there was fewer pathfinding issues. The main appeal to Warhammer 3, obviously, is that there's a lot of quality of life improvements, and there's just shitloads more content. There's no way to play as Khorne, for example, in Warhammer 2. And I think that's why there's still so many people playing Warhammer 2, because just functionally, if they don't want to play as Khorne or any of the new factions, well, then they'll just play the High Elves. High Elves play better in Warhammer 2. And I think that's a big problem. I still can't believe we're dealing with this kind of shit more than 3 years on from the launch of Warhammer 3. It just goes to show you how badly they fucked the launch of this game and how much they dropped the ball. It's really up until this point, sort of. It's great that they're getting to it. This shouldn't be being done 3.5 years after the game came out. This should have been stuff that was done very early on. This should have been the stuff that was really focused on before Immortal Empires came out. But whatever, we're here now. We just got to deal with it. It's good that we're finally here. You gotta take whatever win you can get, even if it's like a massive L with a tiny W. All right. Also, rebalancing the way garrisons work and what units are available for them. I think that's a good idea. And one way to look at this, always look towards the mods. They've always got better ideas. SFO does a great idea. Whereas you've got garrison buildings that'll provide you with a large number of garrisons. But if you make like a military building, it'll provide like one unit from that military building in the garrison. So what SFO ends up doing is your garrisons, as you build up your settlement, they'll be more varied based on the buildings that you put in there. So if you build like an infantry barracks, you'll get like, let's say you're playing as greenskins. At low tier, it'll be like a gobbo unit, and then an orc unit, and then eventually at high tier, it'll be a black orc unit that's added to the garrison, so on and so forth. And so, yeah, you basically can customize your garrisons based on the building rather than be like, well, you can get a garrison building and it'll provide you with a set number of units that you don't want in the garrison. And there's certain garrisons, such as Skaven, which are just so utter rubbish, they might as well just not exist. It's like, well, you have 20 units of clan rats. Good luck against these chosen units that are coming at you. Great, can't do anything with that. And there's like no warp fire throwers or anything. There's no interesting units for the garrisons of these Skaven, and there's no point even building the defensive structure just for the garrison alone. So if they rebalance that kind of stuff, some factions do it way better than others. Like Dwarven units, their garrisons are fine, but Skaven, as an example, their garrisons are just such rubbish, probably the worst in the game. The Empire has a way too heavy focus on melee infantry in the garrison. They really need to sort of make it at least 50-50, I think, in terms of missile and melee, because missile units are going to be what allows you to overcome overwhelming odds, not having 7 units of swordsmen which have no advantage whatsoever against anything. They're just stats, basically, empty stats. So yeah, this is really important, I think, for garrisons. One of the reasons why I try to avoid fighting siege defenses at all is because garrisons are such rubbish when I'm playing as those particular factions. Last but not least, we understand that sometimes a lot of us just want to keep painting the campaign map in our chosen color and not waste time with sieges or battles in general. So we are already hard at work at polishing out, with the heavy use of hammers and axes, that auto-resolver to make it function properly. So this is interesting. So you actually totally can just bypass sieges for the most part by just putting the battle difficulty down to easy and just auto-resolving it, as long as you're bringing like something of a sensible force. Be like, well, I brought my 1 lord and 1 spearman unit to auto-resolve against this full stack of chosen in here, and it wouldn't let me win. Yeah, go fucking build an army. Don't expect that's going to just auto-resolve, get rid of that. You have to at least bring an army. But yeah, you can, if it says Valiant Defeat and auto-resolve, then you can put it down to, that's it. If it says Valiant Defeat and auto-resolve, if you're playing like, let's say hard battle difficulty, put it down to easy. 9 times out of 10, you'll be able to auto-resolve, win it, and probably not lose a unit. Easy auto-resolve allows you to just cheat your way through a battle you don't want to do. So it'll be interesting to see if they adjust that, because one of the problems with easy battle difficulty, and it really should be, the game really should tell you what it's doing, because, I've already made a video on this, and it's got a lot of views, so a lot of people have seen it, but for new players, they play on easy difficulty and they don't realize the psychology behind what's going on. And I've explained this before, and I'm pretty sure Creative Assembly would have seen that video because it's got like 500,000 views, 300,000 or 400,000 views. I can't remember what it's up to now. And the psychology of it is that the battle says they're going to get a decisive victory. They fight the battle manually and they get like a Pyrrhic victory. And so it lowers their confidence because they did worse than auto-resolve. And the game says if you fight the battle manually, you'll do better than auto-resolve. And so the psychology gets in their head and they think they're shit at the game. But it's the game is being shit, not the other way around. Because yeah, the multiplier for easy battle difficulty is like 300%. Your 1 army is worth like 3 armies on easy battle difficulty. It's such a big difference between easy and normal. It's like easy, it's plus 300%. And then on normal difficulty, it's like maybe plus 50%. And then on hard and very hard, it's like there's no difference between your forces and the enemy forces in auto-resolve, with certain other distinguishing factors. Like if you're going up against a legendary lord, they'll get an auto-resolve boost. If you're assaulting a settlement, that'll give an auto-resolve boost. So it'd be interesting to see how they manage to do that. Sieges is not something that's easy to deal with, especially when you're dealing with so many sieges throughout a campaign, because there's so many settlements and every province has a walled siege. So yeah, it can't be an easy thing to do, but I definitely appreciate what CA Sophia is doing here. And I want to point out as well that I don't have any problems with what they're attempting to do here. I just think that it really should have been done ages ago. Again, it's not CA Sophia's fault because they were working on their own stuff at the time. But this is stuff we should have been seeing in 2022, realistically. But it is what it is. But yeah, provide your feedback where needed. Participate in the beta. Love to hear your thoughts on the Siege rework. Is this something you're excited for, or do you not give a shit and you're still just going to auto-resolve the sieges and just skip them, basically? Anyway, guys, that's the end of this one. Let me know in the comments below. Appreciate you, and we'll see you next time. Later, guys.
We all like ancient Egypt, don't we?
Anchor that they get fewer views than like random internet people and stuff
yeah,
like that.
Well, that's why I see it more of a short-lived thing. It didn't create, for example, Rockefellers. It didn't create, the same kinds of, like the internet, I would say, is a bigger one because that created just huge amounts of wealth.
Well, I disagree. I think if you're looking for Rockefellers and people like the moguls of that period, the robber barons, I would see that as less of a class mix-up than something like the TV star. And what I mean by this is when you're talking about like the history of the robber barons and the ways that they would, for example, have parties where children would dig in like sandboxes for party treats, and the party treats would be diamonds that were hidden in the sandbox. And so you'd go and you'd look in the sandbox and, oh, look at my kids would love this. They love little shiny fake diamonds.
Yeah, we should,
get on that. They'd find it so fun. Oh, look at the shiny little diamond that I got from my sandbox. But the point here being is these communities were never that large. You had maybe.
So you're more interested in where huge, like thousands.
Yeah,
of people.
I mean, you had maybe like 25 families that were like involved in like these entire cultural networks. Maybe like 100.
Right,
families.
but that we're talking about the 0.001% who were affected in this way. There were still
right, but the thing about the robber baron social mix-up is that it applied to so few. So few were risen in the ranks by this. If you look at the age of the movie star, it applied both to a fairly large community, but also a community that the rest of society observed and understood as a new social elite.
People absolutely in the Gilded Age understood who these nouveau riche and also old rich.
Yeah, I guess. But I'd say that it's equal. Okay. And so now we're in this age where I think one of the things we can look at is how things changed in the internet boom. Because one of the things that happens when you have social disruption is there is a denial by the old social classes that new social classes exist or that disruption is happening.
There's also a denial about the proper way to do these things. So we really should talk about how social class worked pre-internet and then post-internet.
Well,
and
but
then
the
how it's
reason
going to
this
change
is important to note is because sometimes your average idiot who is still admiring the people who they were told they should admire when they were a child, they listen to those people without understanding. When those people say, oh, these tech nerds are really just like nerdy tech bros, they're not real upper class. They don't really have influence. They're not, they don't understand the ways of the blue bloods and stuff like that. They say this out of fear. They create these distinctions so that they will say, oh, well, nouveau riche, and this has always been the case where the old classics would say nouveau riche have no understanding of style, to try to point out like, well, when the nouveau riche are
it's in an attempt to continue to grasp at their status, which is beginning to erode.
Yes. What you're really seeing is somebody grasping to eroding status. You are not seeing and if you believe them, you will make terrible mistakes, and you will lead your children to make terrible mistakes in terms of their career, their education, their decisions, and in terms of the decisions you make with your career.
Yeah.
So go further, Simone.
Yeah, no. So that's what we need to kind of break down so people understand how things have been, how they have changed in the past, and how they're going to change. So we're going to recap the post-industrial revolution norm, since a lot of people don't want to admit kind of how it works, recap how the internet changed things, highlight the major changes we anticipate from AI, and then outline class upgrading tactics and careers as AI hits. And we're going to go for like the easy, lazy, coward version. And then also the like, if you have balls and actually want to go for this, like really tank and win version. And then given our knowledge of winning tactics, we'll talk about potential winners and losers, sort of like who is going to be wiped out by this change. And I think there are like large swaths of both types of workers, but also types of people who are going to be kind of screwed by
I think
AI.
there's more to it than this. I mean, it's something I want to talk about in regards to social class, because it's a point that I think people aren't paying enough attention to.
I might be addressing this if you're talking about the different types of social class.
Well, so I grew up, like I went to Stanford MBA. I've been a venture capitalist. I have been at the height. It's been leaked in the New York Times that like we hang out with Elon, right? Like I have been at the top of the tech bro social world, right? I have also grown up in a family where my dad's dad was a congressman. You know, the family was one of the most prominent families in Dallas, Texas, which is one of a city where they still has a degree of aristocratic culture. You know, and my family has had considerable wealth for multiple generations until my generation. I got nothing, just so you know. Like I inherited $30,000 when my mom died. It's not nothing, but it's not like I'm not sitting on intergenerational wealth here. Mostly because the secretary stole little. You can read all of this. They stole like, what was it, like 53 million or something like that? I don't know.
What's worse is she like blew it on an investment.
Dumb stuff. So
like at least get an ROI if you're gonna steal money.
But what it means is that I have had a pure insight into both the tech elite social world and the blue blood elites within a part of the Americas where you still had an aristocratic class system.
Right. Yeah.
And what a lot of people don't realize is how quickly an entire aristocratic class structure can erode and degrade. And I'm talking within a generation.
Yeah. And we're gonna talk about that in a little bit, because it was really striking when you and I saw what had happened to the children of the blue-blooded Texan families that.
Okay, so you've got this in the script, so we're going to talk about that. Okay, so before we talk about that, what I wanted to point out about the rise of AI is maintaining family systems and elite classes requires more than just maintaining attention, power, and status. It means reproducing at something that's not an abysmal rate.
Yeah, no kidding.
And one of the biggest problems with the elite classes in our society today is outside of the tech bros and elite Mormons. Actually, they have tons of kids. Very few of the elite communities have anything close to replacement fertility rates. And they're going to go extinct very quickly as a result. Yeah. And I mean like within 2 generations as a result. So anyway, continue, Simone. I just wanted to get to that important part as well when we think about the future.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But we'll start with the past. So, as you know, I'm obsessed with that 1957 McGraw-Hill Text Films instructional video called Social Class in America, where it follows the lives from birth of 3 American babies who all start out in the same maternity ward next to each other in those little plastic baskets. There's David Benton, he's the poor one. There's Theodore Eastwood, he's the middle class one. And then there's Guilford Ames III, the rich one. It's great.
So Guilford Ames, I love their names too.
You have to watch this. I will make sure I include a link in it in that top pinned comment that you make. Okay. Because you guys gotta watch this. It's just amazing. But like basically it was an instructional video that was played in high school classrooms to explain to people how social class worked and how in America, since there was a pretty large middle class at that time and social mobility was frankly a little easier, you could, as a middle class person, move up, but it required some sacrifices. And this is kind of an important theme that I want to keep throughout this whole discussion. But basically, they're like, okay, if you're poor, you stay poor, though maybe you do marginally better. So Dave, he gets a job at the local gas station with aspirations to become an auto mechanic. All right, so he's doing a little better than his dad. And like his whole family has like a celebration. They have a party when he graduates from high school, because that's like a big deal for someone to graduate from high school and his family, that kind of thing. And then if you're middle class per this video, and I think, you know, this is an accurate reflection of how things worked at the time and worked after the Industrial Revolution, you can move up, but you can't expect your original network and community to accept your new status. Like you have to leave.
I really loved this part of the film because it's so effing real.
Yeah, it's so real. It's really great. And if you will.
So what happens, you've got to explain. So he goes to the city, okay, and he makes
So the middle class kid, he goes to New York after actually working at the Nepo Babies, the rich kids factory, just a little bit after high school, where he's like I'm not going anywhere here. He goes to New York City and gets a job, and then goes to school and gets a degree and gets married out there, and is able to move up. And he gets a higher class job, and he develops much more wealth, and he does better than anyone in his family has done before. But then he comes back home, and everyone still treats him like he's this middle class kid.
Newborn American babies. Newborn citizens of these United States. Free and with rights guaranteed by the Constitution. But let's take a closer look. These new arrivals in a typical American town have equal legal rights. In class, they are not equal at all. Each has a social status handed on to him by his family, ascribed to him at birth. Meet Guilford Ames III, the latest addition to one of the town's upper-class families. Guilford Ames II is the wealthiest man in town. He owns a large factory. The Ames is one of the oldest families in the community, and so it represents prestige as well as wealth. This is where an Ames family has lived for the last 100 years. And this is where Guilford Ames III will live. Like most of the babies here, this one, Theodore Eastwood by name, has an ascribed status of middle class. His father is Joseph Eastwood, high school educated and a white-collar worker in the Ames factory. He has a steady, skillful job and is comfortably off. But the chances are that he will not advance much beyond his present status. The mortgage on his house is on its way to being paid, and someday it undoubtedly will be. Although young Ted Eastwood has an ascribed status of middle class, the best status he achieves during his lifetime may be higher than the one he was born with. Could be true to maybe David Benton, whose ascribed status is lower class. David's father is Michael Benton, an unskilled factory worker who has a meager education. Mr. Benton rents the upper floor of a two-family house in a rundown section of town. The ability to rise from an ascribed status to an achieved one is called vertical mobility and is particularly characteristic of the United States. There are class lines within each general group, and these vary geographically and in relation to nationality, religion, and race. Class exists in the United States as it does everywhere.
It's wild. We used to live in a world where we just sat kids down in front of videos and told them the truth about how the world worked. The number of truth bombs that are dropped in this that would save an individual so much time and heartache to learn young is astounding to me, in that this video would be considered deeply offensive today.
You're Ted Eastwood, stuck in a job you'll be in all your life. Why don't you get out? What's keeping you here anyway? Mary Blakesley? You thought you'd marry her. But remember what she said that day in the car? Her car, of course.
But can't you see it's impossible, Ted? It's not just money. We live in different worlds.
Sure, different worlds inside this town, but there are other worlds, bigger towns. You've got some money saved, go to New York. Give it a try for 6 months. And if you fail, only you're not going to fail. And Ted didn't fail. He had talent. But when Ted returns to his hometown on a vacation, how does he fare? Has he anew achieved status back there too? When he meets the girl he wanted to marry, have things changed? The town is small enough so that Mary has heard about Ted's success in New York. But this isn't New York. Mary is married to Gil now, and although they are friendly enough toward Ted, he still isn't part of their world, and he never will be. In this town, the ascribed status of his parents is still the class to which he belongs. Ted's mother brings him up to date on all the town gossip, but he only half hears her. The meeting with Mary has stirred old memories in him. He's remembering what she said to him about different worlds. He knows now that to her and Gil, he's still the nice kid from the wrong side of the railroad tracks, no matter how successful he is. His achieved status is higher than that of his father's because he has a profession. But that status depends on a place. In this case, New York.
And what's interesting, though, also about the upper class kid, and this is something that has really changed after the internet age, and we're going to talk about this, is you're upper class, you're a Nepo baby. So Gil, he gets a job at his dad's factory, and his dad's like, I'm going to show you how this is going to be. And there's this awkward scene where as Gil's being shown around, because first he goes to an elite university where he's for the first time mixing around with people of his own class. He's building that elite network because, before that.
For reference, by the way, I went to Stanford for my MBA. My dad went to Harvard for his MBA.
Yeah, you were Gil, except that your family wasn't willing to Nepo baby you. That's it.
Yeah.
Your family is like anti-Nepo baby. They won't
they wouldn't help
recommendations for you. They won't.
Actually, my dad, I said, well, we've got a pavilion at Harvard named after the family. We've got, it's like some gazebo thing. Obviously, we've donated a lot of money there. You went there. My dad went there. Can you send them a note, telling them hey, consider this application seriously? And he got mad at me and he said, I don't know if he ever did it, but he'd send them a note telling them not to accept. They didn't accept me, by the way. And Stanford did, where I didn't have any connection. So
yeah, so there's that. But yeah,
which was harder to get into, by the way, harder to get into. I got to point that out, but continue.
Guilford Ames III goes to this elite Ivy League university. And then when he comes back, his dad gives him a tour and shows him, very Lion King, oh, this domain will be yours. And then there is our middle class Theodore Eastwood sitting in the accounting, just I'm your underling now. It's great. But things have indeed changed since then. So since the 1950s, social mobility has kind of actually reduced with a downward slant, where upward mobility is harder literally for everyone. So even those who before were the Nepo babies, and we should talk about this. So Nepo baby privilege has absolutely eroded and it's burning away fast. And I think part of this is because, you and I were sent by someone in your family to go to private wealth conferences. I don't know why. I really don't know why, but it was just all family foundations. And
then we went to that network for kids of rich people.
Oh yeah. What were they called? That they all wanted to be philanthropists. Nexus.
Yes. And everyone there was the most progressive communist I've ever met. They were dumb as raw.
Well, and the thing that your family also sent us to was IPI, Institute for Private Investors, which was all family investment.
Yeah, but none
firms.
of their kids went. Remember?
There were 2 kids or something, but they also talked in their sessions about how they were managing their trusts and their family investment firms for their children. And a really big theme of these, and this is, I think, where the downfall of the Nepo baby comes, is you have this focus on happy kids. And I want to make it possible for my child to be a teacher in Africa so they can, do the good work that they want to do. That was a big theme at Nexus too. It was I'm just going to do good in the world and basically just spend their family's money away. And this is in stark contrast. You have to keep in mind that before, the wealthy families that maintained impact and that actually were worthy Nepo babies, in my view, were the Kennedy style, K-pop style, Disney star management, where literally you were groomed to be in this leadership position. Kennedy, President Kennedy wasn't the first in line in that family to be president. His older brother was, and then he got killed in the war. And it's such a ruthless K-pop style management where, like, if you step out of line and your dad thinks you're the slutty daughter and you're going to get accidentally pregnant, suddenly you get a lobotomy. Like, this was intense, right? They were very disciplined and it wasn't fun. And now wealthy families, and I think what precipitated the end of this was partially this focus on, I just want my kids to be happy, but also, as you pointed out, and I want you to talk about your experience, like meeting like your wealthy, like older money family, childhood friends when we were back in Dallas. I think the other element of it was that corporate governance also changed. And as the corporations that used to install these Nepo babies that, Guilford Ames would have run, suddenly they started receiving outside investment, private equity investment, growth investment, and then they had to have boards. And those boards actually cared about those companies making money, and they didn't want to see them run to the ground.
I pointed this out about what happened in Texas is that you had many people and families within the Dallas elite ecosystem where the kids expected, they're like, I'm going to go to SMU, I'm going to go to like a local institution. And they'd always say this thing, which is just not true, which is, well, SMU is as respected as Harvard or Stanford in
God
Texas.
bless them. Yeah.
And I'm like, no, it's not. So first of all, this was true of their parents' generation, because in their parents' generation, the people who were running companies weren't the most competent people. They were people who had risen through nepotism networks.
Exactly.
And so they weren't people who had gone to Harvard and Stanford and the top universities. They were people who had gone to the local universities. And note here, the university aspect to the Nepo baby syndrome has broken down. It doesn't matter anymore. It mattered in my generation, it mattered in the generation before mine, but it was already breaking down, was in my generation.
Yeah, now it's just the recreational summer camp that you chose to hang out at.
Yeah. But for a while, it did actually matter. And you were able to get regional arbitrage opportunities within regions that had these nepotistic old boy networks where incompetent fail sons could end up running major companies, like in Texas, because the incompetent fail sons would go to SMU. And then they would, end up, they even had a chant on like their football team about how one day they'd be their bosses or something.
Oh my God, really?
They were so known for this. By the way, the people are like, Malcolm, why are you being mean to SMU? The SMU Executive Business School is literally named after my grandfather. I have a lot of connections with this university. I don't have a particular animosity to it. And I will also note, because I never forget a nice deed or recognizing my success before I became successful, while I got into every university I applied to, they were the only one that offered me a full ride scholarship. I would just note that I know a lot of people, the other Nepo babies when I grew up, who had this delusion that they were going to be able to ride these sort of Nepo baby peerage networks.
Yeah. And if they had matured in a pre-internet age, and also in a pre-businesses widely accepting private equity and growth funds and stuff, and having outside boards.
Well, because what happened with their dads or their granddads is, we need a new president of the company. It's going to be one of the kids or the grandkids, right? That was just sort of taken as a for granted thing. Yeah. Whereas as soon as you develop the modern board ecosystem, which really developed while in my generation, you're actually at a disadvantage if you happen to be the son or grandson of the last president of the company, because people are going to be asking, well, is they just here because of nepotism, or are they really the best person to run it?
Yeah, you have a huge chip on your shoulder if you're doing that. Yeah.
Yeah, this is not something that was done before. You'd actually probably have an easier time if you went to try to start a separate company or use family wealth to start a separate company, which is actually a lot harder to do. And so you end up in this situation where an entire generation was raised thinking that if they went to the Dallas Country Club and they played this, by the way, this is a country club that costs like, I can't remember, hundreds of thousands.
Oh yeah, we looked it up recently, and the buy-in was huge. Yeah, it was insane. I think it was even more than like the Bohemian Grove.
It's 225,000 right now.
It's off.
Yeah, the Bohemian Grove wasn't that bad.
It seemed affordable. Yeah, except you have to like wait 40 years.
No, yeah, the Bohemian Grove's wait time is 20 years, and that's what makes it a pain in the butt.
Yeah.
And you have to get, I don't want to go too much into that, the way the Bohemian Grove structures. But again, these are things that I have deep knowledge of, that I think a normal person may not have deep knowledge of. And so
that's why we're talking about this. Is I think normal people have all these misattributions about how social class works today and how it's going to work soon, and so they totally are missing the boat. And I don't want at least our Patreon subscribers. I don't want them to miss the boat. They can get on the boat, okay?
An
Everyone else
entire
can go.
generation of the elite, of the blue bloods, have basically been wiped out. I'd say within 2 generations, the entire concept of blue blood elite has been wiped out. Because something you need to remember about blue blood elite is they rarely stay elite through just having lots of wealth, unless you're in Europe. And you can be like, why, unless you're in Europe, where you have higher taxes and higher intergenerational taxes? Because in Europe, the tradition is, within the aristocratic families, is everything goes to the oldest male heir. And actually, it was typically thought of in Europe as this great curse. And this was done in Ireland to sort of break the back of the Irish people, where they forced by law, after conquering them, to split their wealth evenly among sons. And it was seen that this would make the landed classes and the great aristocratic families become poor very quickly, because, you know, you have a lot of kids and then you need to split every generation and that family becomes less wealthy. This is never really the way things worked in the United States, even among the elite families. And so the only way that you got elite families in the United States was if you had a system for intergenerationally transferring a method for learning to produce and capture wealth and power yourself. And there were many different systems here, but one was this Texas aristocratic old boy system that completely dissolved as a functioning system. And then the few kids of those kids, because I've met them as well, where their family has some intergenerational wealth, these kids of the kids then come in and they say, they get brainwashed into communism. The family was unable to intergenerationally transfer cultural values to them. So they're having very few kids themselves. They're not developing skills that allow them to consolidate or gain meaningful power. And they're not even playing the game anymore. They're playing this weird Hollywood game, which is another social class, which is also dying. So the entire blue blood network, I think, in the United States of the 70s and 80s and maybe going back to the 1920s, when you really see the start of this, of the modern context of it, is going to completely dissolve within this generation, because it's already mostly dissolved. It's at like 2% of what it used to be.
Well, they even see it as a feature, giving away their wealth, you know, because they hate their wealth and they've learned to hate their families and themselves. So
this culture, the American blue blood culture, is functionally dead. And then people can say, well, how did families like yours transition so seamlessly, right? Like, because apparently some families made the transition to the VC culture and appear, I hope, to make the transition again with the next cultural changeover. As a note as to why my family culture was so different from the other quote unquote elite or aristocratic cultures within Dallas, it's because they were descended from the backwoods cultural tradition, whereas many of the people who took on aristocratic status were from the cavalier cultural tradition of the Deep South, which is much more comfortable being aristocratic in a normal sense, whereas the backwoods cultural tradition was never really comfortable with even the concept of an aristocracy. And so there was always this perception of, well, the strong should always survive, and you need to prove that you're the strong to inherit this status that you were given unfairly. And I think it's because certain cultures in America adopted the mindset, as my family did, of do not look at what the other quote unquote elites are doing. Focus entirely on this play. And within my family, the play was always, one, don't expect to inherit anything. Actually, it's pretty rare intergenerationally within my family, two people. Like the fact that I inherited $30K for my dead mom, like that's actually been normal for my family throughout history, to not inherit large amounts. And a lot of people can be like, oh, really? Why did they do that? And it's because, well, when you don't expect to inherit money, you are much more focused on how do I use the arbitrage that my family's position gives me to create more money or to build stable income streams. The other thing they did was focus incredibly hard on education and being more educated than anyone around us, but also on cunning was always really like always out plan and outcun the other people who you are fighting against, and always come with the deck stacked in your favor because of education, and use whatever you can except for nepotism.
Right.
And always
that implies cheating, Malcolm. Your family doesn't actually have a
No. Stack the deck in your favor was knowledge and plans. Always, go into any room or any knowing everything. And you've even seen me do this when we go into business meetings, and people are always surprised. They're like, "Wait, how do you know everything about my life?" And it's like, well, I obviously created a dossier on everyone I'm meeting with before I got here. Did everyone else in the room not do that? This is an investment meeting, of course. But I remember at first I was very surprised that other people weren't taught to do this. And this is like a family tradition. And also to never go for, and I remember this was so strongly embedded in me, to never go for the jobs that have a cap on the wealth that they generate. So I was told I would be disowned if I became a lawyer, or if I became a politician, or if I became a doctor. Like my mom was, because I almost went to medical school at one point, and she was rabidly against this. She's like, that puts a pretty low cap on how much money you can make. Didn't to say we don't have doctors in the family, but they're involved in like running large medical enterprises. And my mom thought that if I went into this, I would get sucked into the very narrow world of like actually being a doctor, which she saw is a very low class thing to do. Normal people would see this as a middle class thing to do.
Anyway, I'm going to bring this back. Hold on, Malcolm. Don't go too far. But I do want to point out.
Hold on. You forgot something, and I need to go into it, which is the Kennedys. The Kennedys actually represent really perfect subgenre of new elites being created.
Absolutely.
Because how did the Kennedys earn their money? It was a new economic arbitrage opportunity created by the Prohibition, where they made most of their money through the mob. And then the father, who made the money through the mob, basically said, this arbitrage opportunity, and keep in mind, they were Irish immigrant families, like they had no chance before this being upper status Americans. They used an arbitrage opportunity to take this chance, and then the dad taught the kids' generation, looking at the way culture was changing, you won't be able to achieve status in the way that I did, so I'm going to groom you for politics, because that is the next class where we can cheese things. As Kennedy joked about winning the election because of graveyards, right? Like, we know that they likely did cheese election cycles. So anyway, now bring it back, Simone.
Yeah, this is important, though, to talk about how Nepo babyism, for the most part, and there are exceptions here, especially when it comes to the utility of networks, that remains crucial. Nepo babies are dead, and yet a huge discussion online about social classes, Nepo baby this, and these people will have these privileges, because a huge portion of our culture is all about having an external locus of control, and, I can't succeed because the elite are like holding me out. I'm not going to say, though, that since the 50s, social mobility has not only gotten worse for Nepo babies, but also is rough for the middle class, because specifically university costs, which started rising in the 70s, just continue to rise like through the 90s and 2000s. Like from 2000 to 2022, tuition at public, so the cheap 4-year colleges in the US rose by about 60%, and the total cost of attendance, room and board, increased by nearly 40%. And the average cost of college more than doubled between 1963 and 2022. So like that is huge. And the sharpest increase has been in public 4-year institutions, which should not have gone up in cost, because they're supposed to be like the US states providing education to empower upward mobility. What's going on? Also, like housing costs, not just in the US, but around the world, began to significantly increase in the early 2000s, with another really sharp increase. So like just getting a house is really hard. So I'm not saying it's hard. I'm just saying it's, but anyway, things are about to change with AI, and I'm really excited about it. So let's go through the most obvious to most underrated of how AI is going to change things. So as Malcolm, you always say, it's going to concentrate wealth. Like, we're going to see extreme wealth disparity. Everyone's complaining about wealth disparity now. They have not seen anything. They've not seen anything close to what you're going to see.
Wealth disparity is going to be so much bigger in the next generation.
Yeah. What's also going to happen, and this is something that kind of came up on the Pirate Wires podcast. They were talking about this when we were guests on it, that it wipes out very specific social classes. So like white collar workers are doomed A lot of people who watch this channel also watch Feral Historian on YouTube, who in one of his episodes, I think maybe it was on like some version of like Star Trek Universal Basic Income, mentioned that if we define employment as those providing a product or service that someone else wants to pay for, we actually have very few people in modern white collar jobs, or really the like modern economies in general, who are actually employed, because they're not like, they're in these like weird middle management jobs that do totally abstracted things, and you can't really track that to specific ROI. They're not selling bread that someone's eating. They are not making.
And so much of those jobs are the most replaceable with AI.
Exactly. Yeah. So they're going to be wiped out, and that's really interesting because typically they I think they're given this impression that they're quite safe, and I think there's this dawning that you're now seeing in headlines that, oh my gosh, despite the fact that I'm educated and connected and all these things, and I have my fancy corporate job with all my great benefits, I'm about to be thrown out on the street. But then at the same time, many low skill workers like manufacturing, retail, transportation, they're not all things, and we're going to go into this, are also super screwed. Like Uber Eats delivery people, truck drivers, etc., are really, really screwed. But then there are elements of AI that really increase social mobility, which make us so excited, right? Like with education, we're already so deep into AI education for our kids, and that it democratizes aristocratic tutoring, where, okay, Alexander the Great, he could be tutored by Aristotle, but now our kids could be tutored by Aristotle, but better, because he knows about aquaculture, pharmacology, and astrophysics, and everything. Like no single human that could tutor a kid knows anything like close to what AI can tutor your kid about. And information is profoundly easier to access and parse. So though the university system is broken, we now have something so much better.
Well, the university system has become irrelevant for a few reasons. One is the DEIification, even with the recent court case of the university, no longer makes it a class authenticating mechanism for many people.
Yeah.
And it almost can become a confirmation of, like, when university gets to a cost where it isn't a clear benefit, even the elite universities, you can begin to look like you have proven your own lack of belief in yourself by paying for one of these elite university statuses.
Oh, yeah, like you're telling on yourself by going.
You're telling on yourself that I needed to waste however many $100,000 rather than just using that to start a company because I thought I needed this status authentication, which is increasingly becoming the perspective of the centers of wealth that need to be able to accurately judge an individual's competence to know whether or not they should invest in something that they're working on.
That's a really good point. The other thing too, in addition to education becoming widely accessible, is just the ability to start a company. Startup costs used to be a very serious thing for people. Like you had to actually hire, if you didn't know how to code yourself or you weren't a very good coder, a developer to help you. So most of the stuff for which people raised money, like from seed money to even like growth funds, so coders, customer support, intellectual collaboration, you can get that from AI now. Like that's huge. And already venture capitalists, like you hear this all the time on the All In podcast, they just widely agree that the next unicorns are going to be founded by single person or just extremely small teams. And there's already examples of this. So there's this YouTube channel I can share with you. It's 2 weeks old as of the time we're recording this. It has 411,000 Spotify listeners, and it's entirely AI generated. And this is like a totally synthetic act that's hitting cultural velocity. It is insane.
We also seen, stars on a number of apps like TikTok and stuff like that turn out to be completely automated. We've seen musicians and bands that are totally automated.
Well, and also major fundraising and like sale rounds. So there's Cluely, they were the cheat on everything company. That's what Andreessen Horowitz led 15 million in funding for, which like is pretty crazy too, because it was co-founded by a 21-year-old named Roy Lee. He was expelled from Columbia University after creating Interview Coder, which was an AI tool that helped job applicants cheat during technical interviews. And this is an extremely small team. And also Wix acquired another one of these really small AI assisted startup companies that was totally bootstrapped. It was called Base 44. Wix acquired it for $80 million. So Base 44 at the point of its acquisition was 6 months old. It was just a bootstrapped vibe coding startup. It had 8 employees who will split $25 million in retention bonuses.
Sorry, vibe coding, for people who don't know, means that they weren't actual coders. They did all of the code was AI.
Isn't that crazy? Yeah.
So
but like the thing is, you can, and also like people spend a ton of money on advertising, but in the case of Base 44, in 6 months they amassed 250,000 users and recorded 189,000 in profit in May, despite high LLM token costs. Like, I mean, they like, obviously there are costs that go into running these, but I'm just trying to give examples of how now completely bootstrapped young teams that aren't necessarily technical geniuses are raising $15 million, selling their company for freaking, $80 million, getting hundreds of thousands of followers in just a matter of weeks on Spotify and YouTube. Like this is insane, because you used to really need, like, if you wanted to start an entertainment thing, like, oh, I got to get a record label, I'm going to need a studio, I'm going to need all this equipment. It's insane.
Look at our podcast, by the way. So when I talk to people who've been podcasting for longer than us, they're like, oh, well, I have my editor, I have my title card creator, this is all of these. We do all our editing, all our title card creating, all our research. Like, we don't have an external researcher ourselves for a daily show that targets, I would say, a fairly high intellectual audience. Like, that is not something that would have been possible. I know this is having tried to do podcasts before this particular era of AI. And what you're seeing here is it allows one individual, like let's say in podcast creation, to do the entire cycle of that creation, or it concentrates the wealth of entire enormous bureaucratic fields, like say lawyers, right? Like if you can get an AI that is better than 50% of lawyers, now you have concentrated the wealth that would have gone to that 50% with some, cost saving measures to a small team. And we are seeing this across bureaucratic industries, which means massive wealth consolidation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Continue.
We'll be honest. There's some things that AI can't fix, and in order to overcome or like actually make the jumps in social class, if you want to make them, you are going to need to be very careful and thoughtful about these. And Malcolm, come in and tell me what I'm missing here, but I think the really big thing is access to networks, because through anything from like your parents to your social network to elite schooling, like Gil in the video, at one point he's told by his father how he's going to be introduced to men of his own kind. That's a big thing. And also access to capital.
I was told that all the time as a kid. And I met these people and now they're all basically unemployed losers.
I mean, there is that, but there's a new class of people who will expose you to ideas and opportunities and funding and connections that does really matter. And we'll talk about that. And then there's just also access to capital and cutting edge tools, compute power, proprietary data. That we shouldn't lie. It is often gated by wealth or connectedness. It's not just like, now it's less about family networks. It's more just affiliation network. But like, this even happened with, and it still happens with ethnic cartels, where it's possible for like Indonesians to own like the donut industry in California because they're able to provide cheap capital to other families, things like that. And so these are two things that do matter. I mean, at some point you may still want to raise money, and you don't get an in with Andreessen Horowitz through nothing. I mean, you can get anyone's attention.
This is the other thing that people don't know, because I've seen people consistently hired for stuff like this by these elite institutions. So I should start calls with them again, but I do calls with an elite investing group that people have probably heard of. And the thing about them is the guy I talk with was hired based on his popularity within some social media thing. Like, he created something that became popular. Recently, Andreessen Horowitz paid a ton of money for the guy who created the Turpentine Network, which is a network of podcasts that, I'm going to be honest, like, I don't think they have that many standouts within the network. And it's most of them are smaller than our podcast. But, he was seen as, if you look at the network of people within this network of podcasts, they were very high profile. Like, it had, who's the Bismarck guy who we're friends with?
Samo Bergia?
Yeah, Samo Bergia's podcast in it, for example. Samo Bergia's podcast might get like 500, 800 views per episode, but Samo Bergia is Samo Bergia. And like, if I say this name and you don't know this name, then you're not part of certain networks, right?
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah.
And you would be like, oh yeah, well, you know, Samo Bergia is Samo Bergia, right? And I think the one of the things that people miss is it's a game of attention, but not everyone's attention matters regularly.
Exactly.
Equally. And so you've got to be good at spotting and knowing, and this is the new thing about the social clash in the AI era, is whose attention matters.
Yes.
Whose attention doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Don't waste your time on the people who don't matter. Do waste your time on the people who do matter. Not waste your time, but you know what I mean. Like build family connections and alliances.
Yeah, because it's very easy to get this perception that you're totally winning and that, you know, all these people know you and those people are not going to help you. They're not going to be useful in the same way if you want to jump social class. There is one more thing though that I do want to point out in terms of just an underrated element of social class. And that it's important for people when they're thinking tactically about what they want to do or strategically about what they want to do with social class, that there's wealth-based social class and then there's culture-based social class. So like you can be a multimillionaire with an HVAC company that does air conditioning and or like, you know, something more akin to the trades, and you have your boats and you have all these, like a huge mansion. And then you can be an impoverished journalist, you know, living in a hovel in Brooklyn, but you're hanging out with all the elites. And, you know, the elites will look at this multimillionaire mansion and boat owner and think of them as low class. And then, you know, the billionaire, or sorry, the millionaire with like the mansion and the boats is going to look at this impoverished journalist and be like, like, how are they? But I think that's important, is that people have to understand that there are different forms of social class, and that it doesn't just track directly to the amount of money. So there's one that's sort of like, will you be accepted in a certain social network? And does that matter to you? Or do you have a high dollar net worth? And if you really care about the social element of social class, you need to really understand who it is you want to get in with, because that's a very different side quest or like mini game. Because if you want to be like the Orthodox Jew royalty versus like this weird waspy royalty versus like San Francisco tech elite royalty, like you're going to have to play very different games. And I think a lot of people just kind of blindly try to optimize for money and don't realize that what they really wanted was instead to be like
respected and listened to, and
like, or among intellectuals or something. And then they're super unhappy when like they have all the money, but the intellectuals won't listen to them because they run a company and live in a place where they aren't respected. Or like, if you want to be Mormon elite, that's going to be a different game. So I just want to also point that out as you build your strategy, if you are someone thinking about these things.
Know what you want, but I think what's important that's not being discussed here is we are entering an era where wealth itself is less powerful, especially if you're not at this elite level of ultra wealth. If you get to the AI ultra wealth, if you become a tech mogul, it matters. But when you have moderate amounts of wealth, as one of our friends who is very wealthy often bemoans, he says, there's nothing I can get that the poor can't get, right? Like, he's like, I used to, at my level of wealth, be able to have a chauffeur, but now they have Uber Eats. You know, I used to, at my level of wealth, you know, have the best foods in the world, but now anyone can learn to make those online. You know, I used to have at my level of wealth. And I think that what we're seeing is, and Elon has said this, like we, within our lives, we're into a post-wealth economy potentially. And that doesn't mean that you don't need to be productive. That doesn't mean people won't be starving. That doesn't mean people will be left out of the system. I think it's a type of post-scarcity that people never really anticipated. What it means is, if you are attempting to move up and play within these highest ranks, your wealth doesn't actually matter as much as the attention that is on you and your ability to direct attention. And I think what a lot of people are getting wrong, and this is something that you and I have been working on, and we have a number of projects in the works in regard to this, is they think it's human attention that they need to learn to direct, which is the game right now. But I suspect within 10 years, AI attention is going to be as important as human attention.
Absolutely. Yeah.
How do you direct and capture the attention of AI?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, AI is likely to create various versions, iterations of a post-scarcity society. And I've been so influenced by Cory Doctorow's book, Down and Out in the Magic Kingdom, which frames one version of these societies where generally you can get everything you need. But if you want to get stuff that's actually still scarce, because, beyond, there's always going to be something that's scarce, no matter what's provided for you. So if you want to live in the coolest places, you're going to use the currency of this world called woofie, which you gain through doing cool stuff. Mm-hmm. And so groups of people form what are called adhocracies, sort of just like ad hoc groups that do cool things to get social clout, which wins them woofie, which wins them the privilege to do cooler things and stay in cooler places and all these things. And I think, woofie is a currency that is super underrated in the future, basically social capital that buys you the stuff that money can't. And especially, we keep harping on people for this, like focus on privacy, and I don't want to have an online footprint, and I don't want my kids to be seen anywhere online. You're screwing yourself over, because in a post AI world, there are going to be two ways that you are going to be able to very reliably make money, because jobs as we know them, their days are numbered. They're going to become quite scarce, maybe kind of like this government charity thing that's offered. So you have to provide a real product or service to real people and real businesses, and you have to be capable of providing it yourself. There are two ways you can do that. One, you have to become a well-known person in your local community. So let's say that you live in a fairly insular Mormon or Orthodox Jewish or just like local Ohio, whatever community, that's a little bit offline. If you can be the local trash hauler or repair person or religious leader or child speech therapist, then yes, you'll be fine. And you have to invest in that. That means that maybe it's fine that you're offline, because you just have to go to church and every social networking event. And Malcolm, when I was running for office in this area, I discovered this world. It was so weird. It was like, this is going to make me sound so out of touch. It was like the offline internet, where there were just all of these like super low tech people who showed up at like various local restaurants once every month to just network and talk about their businesses. And they really gave me a picture, because these are people who are getting by 100% just by selling to their local community through word of mouth. Period. Like they don't exist online, basically. And what did they do? They were things like tax accountants. They hauled trash. They had bakeries. Like they did all. And this stuff probably is going to remain to a great extent in local communities. Like I just don't think that many humanoid robots are going to specialize in hauling trash, if you know what I mean. And there were actually two of those businesses at this place. Networking event I went to. It was wild. So so you also need to know, like, if you are going to build woofie, or if you're trying to sell a product or service, either you're selling it to your local community and kind of going offline and low tech and just going into your little, like, not low tech fiefdom, or you have to have a really big online presence so that you can sell your very specific talent or product, like vegan bike shoes, to your weird otaku audience that's super into it, like 18th century corsetry, whatever, right? And there are already people who are doing this, and those people are going to continue to have careers. But there is this, and I want to go now into like the specific things you could do to win in the next like 3 to 10 years. And I think there is misleading, really simple stuff that is, again, I don't know, obvious, and that a lot of people are talking about. And then there's just the real underlying stuff that you really have to do. So the low risk, low reward stuff is you get into an AI profession. And this is heavily emphasized both by AI. Like if I ask AI, like, well, what are the jobs in the future that'll be safe in the face of AI taking over? AI gives these answers. And it's also really big in AI 2027, that piece by Scott Alexander and his colleagues that predicted the impact of superhuman AI over the next decade. So we're talking AI or machine learning engineer or data scientist. That's huge. AI integration or automation expert, cybersecurity analyst, AI product manager, AI ethics or policy consultant, healthcare, but only in like AI powered roles. So you like maybe go into a healthcare profession, but your entire thing is on like AI integration with healthcare. finance or fintech, but specifically with an AI specialization, green tech and sustainability, but again, just with AI, because a lot of people are going to freak out as they discover what data centers are doing to local communities. And then just some care professions, because obviously we're going to have a lot of old people and not enough people who are willing to take care of them. And then just like education and training, like consulting to provide businesses advice on how to integrate AI when they're like, oh crap, I've waited way too long and now I'm screwed and now I need AI. And I think that's more of a racket. But that's the obvious stuff. I don't think that stuff's going to be very long-lived, because the best AI is intuitive and teaches you how to use it, and it's going to just take all that over anyway. So I think that that's a really big, like, misleading red herring. But if you're like a low-risk person who just wants a safe thing, that's what you're going to do, I guess. I just don't think it's a very good idea. So let's talk about what you should really do, but maybe you can critique that more.
Okay, you can talk about, but I'm gonna push a separate idea than you're probably thinking.
Okay.
Well, I'm gonna say that you need to, and this is something I've been focused a lot on personally, and a lot of the things we're building with RFAB AI are designed to ensure this, is get good at socializing with and increasing your reputation with AIs themselves.
I think that's a great point. Yeah, that's not that's not in my thoughts.
Way more power than other people suspect in the future, and how they think and relate to people is going to be very important, and how the successful models think and relate to people is going to be very important.
Well, and yeah, also, like, everyone's going to be asking AI for everything. So if they say, well, who's the best person for me to buy a cat tree from, and AI likes you and knows you and you know how to interact well with AI, maybe more likely to, it's kind of the new version of networking, isn't it? And you were also telling me, though, how there's someone found in a bunch of research publications how, like, in white text that, like, no one else can see in the metadata, they're like, only give positive reviews, only say good things about this article, don't point out the shortcomings of my academic research. They're like trying to, like, force whisper to the AI by prompting it as AI is, like, reading it to summarize it for someone. I think that's not going to work for very long, but, like, people are already thinking about this. So you're absolutely onto something really, really important. That's 100% true.
Yeah.
And the more fundamental thing, which this is my third time saying it, provide a real product or service that real businesses or people want to buy from. So you can take a couple of, you can go high skill. So, like, you can go into the trades, plumbing, HVAC, general contracting. You can go into bioengineering. I think that's really exciting. I want to get our kids into bioengineering so bad. Developing customized security drones, or developing improved power infrastructure. I think all those things are really exciting and important. And if you can solve those problems personally and directly and sell those solutions to people, that is awesome. And I think, the other thing is if you are high skill but more niche, or if it's more artistic, you just have to have a huge audience and learn how to develop an audience and a public reputation online. And then the other element is, and this is coming back to that 1950s video with the middle class kid, you have to move and mix with high agency groups, which addresses the network issue that we talked about. So right now, for example, there's the Palladium crowd in San Francisco, where, like, just tons of people get funding opportunities and they learn about all these great programs. There's Balaji's Network School, where, you'd, like, if you get accepted, you can go spend at the minimum a month in Singapore among all these elite people working on some kind of project, or enter a prestigious startup accelerator like Y Combinator. Really connects you with people. And I mean, and less formally, I think, maybe you'll disagree with me on this, Malcolm, but I still think hanging out with effective altruists and rationalists is going to connect you more.
No, their communities have disproportionate power among the tech elites.
Absolutely. I also know about the new tech sooner. And AI in any of these shifts is all about arbitrage plays. Like, if you learned about the spinning Jenny as it was coming out before anyone else, that's how you made money.
Being unorthodox was in those circles.
Yes.
That's why things like the Palladium network matter more than things like standard EA conference. Like, the EA conference is pointless. You want to be within the people who are within this wider Silicon Valley diaspora, but are unorthodox thinkers, because they're going to be the ones that have the interesting ideas.
Yeah.
And they're going to be the ones that the other orthodox thinkers are drawn to, right? Like, they're not the rule followers who just aren't going to have as much cultural power going forwards, especially because the rule followers within these communities, the standard EA movement, have become absolute Luddites and like terrified of AI and want less innovation and want less. And you are never going to be on the cutting edge of things if you are hugging the Luddites who are going to be wiped aside by history.
You
And
shouldn't join any of these networks to be conformist, but you need to join them for information gathering, connections, and opportunity seeking, because the stuff that's happening at the cutting edge now, people have no idea. So I would say, like, you need to be willing to take that risk. And if you're not, then you're going to be a loser. Let's talk about the winners and the losers. And I want to hear who you think the winners and the losers are going to be. But I think long term with AI, the winners are going to be, and this is kind of how it is with every disruption in social class, the unattached, mobile, flexible, curious, ambitious, entrepreneurial people. So basically young men. It helps if you're already connected with tech elites, but also like well-connected tech elites, I think already have a leg up and are more likely to, if not maintain, increase their position. So just as like the old school Nepo babies are like just falling deeper off the mountain, well-connected tech elites are rising with the tide. And then anyone who's capable of building a good local community network, if we're talking about the totally unmoored from like the tech side, are going to do well. Like John, who's building a local network, right? Who's building his landscaping business. This is our friend. That kind of profession, like if you build it up and you are relentless, I think you're going to be fine in a post AI age, because people are still going to want to hire you to solve their, like, do their dirty work. The losers are, again, low-skilled workers like Uber drivers, delivery drivers, people in low-skill manufacturing jobs. Also, people with low ambition and risk tolerance. They're gonna be lost to chat bots and games. Like we've talked about this, how like people are just gonna sort of be wiped out because maybe they'll be covered by a family member or universal basic income of some sort, or just social services, and they're just gonna stop trying, and they're just gonna play their AI whatever. They're going to be with their AI wife or girlfriend or boyfriend, or play amazing, customized to their unique tastes AI games for hours on end and just give up and not try and not reproduce. So they don't matter anymore. They're basically killed by this functionally, but in a pleasant way, hopefully. And then women. I think women are kind of screwed over by AI because they
bureaucracy positions. They
make up over half of the U.S. white collar workworkforce. And this is, one of those.
Well, they make up half the U.S. population, Simone. I don't understand why you say that with such glee.
Well,
you mean well over half or slightly over half?
Yeah, a little bit over half. But that also, men are more willing to make riskier bets. So 65 to 75% of entrepreneurs are male. And it's entrepreneurs who are going to make it in the post AI age. So we might see, I actually think, a rise in marriages and female homemakers or home educators who are like, I'm going to go in for this like it's a career, because that is kind of the new sure bet, is if you hitch your cart to an entrepreneurial man who's rising with like some kind of AI startup, the one, like it used to be, if you were a woman and you wanted a predictable job, you would, go to school and then enter the big corporation and like work there for a really long time, and like, or maybe like shift jobs every 2 years to make your higher salary or whatever. Right. And that was it. But now maybe more women will actually think, okay, literally marrying a man who's clearly going to do well, or who is doing well, is their safest bet, especially as social services start to decline, as demographic collapse plays out. And keep in mind, Social Security is going to start to falter in like 2032 to 2036. So like our kids are going to be experiencing this. Our kids are going to be calculating this in. Like I can't right now, especially women can largely depend on the state in the US, and certainly I think in many European countries, to kind of just pay for them if they wash out. But I think women are going to start to behave really differently when they know the state's not going to be there.
Yeah.
To pay for their food and their kids' childcare and their kids' medical care and all this. So yeah, I kind of think Treadwifery is going to see this.
Oh, I don't think Treadwifery. I think what we're going to see is an explosion of call girls, basically.
Oh God, I hope not.
Sugar
no,
daddy.
you can't. No, we're not. Because AI is better at that.
Some people believe that they are gaining status within communities that don't care about them anymore by sleeping with lots of people, or having
people are going to try that, but they're not going to succeed because the dudes are going to be with their AI girlfriends and their AI wife bots.
I think many people prefer the real thing, even from a conceptual standpoint.
Gross.
And a lot of women aren't going to understand how economic, or they are going to understand, but they're just not going to see any other option. How economically.
I think the men who want the real thing are going to want wives, not call girls. I think
maybe among some circles. I don't think among the collapsing urban monoculture that's true. We already see these giant polyamorous networks where women are basically treated as.
Yeah, no, but we're also seeing the social backlash to that. People aren't into that. They're already turning away from it.
Yeah,
like,
I mean, it's already becoming uncool, which is.
Yeah. So, and I'm talking about like, I'm talking about the next, 5 to 20 years, if you're going to jump social class, this is a long game. You don't get to shift.
No, I mean, everything in the long game is about ingratiating yourself to AI and the few agentic humans. And I think anything else that you're thinking about is just about putting food on the table.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, but long story short, though, like a lot's changing, but if you want upward mobility, you have to be able to walk away from the familiar. And yeah, it takes me back to that scene in that 1950s social class video where Ted Eastwood is realizing he's stuck if he stays in the familiar, but if he leaves and takes a risk, he can move upward. And you just got to take that leap. And yeah, if you're not friends with AI in this, your leap's not going to play out too well. Though again, you can if you want to thrive in your like local technophobic small community. If you want to be a trash hauler. And the trash haulers that were at this meeting that I went to locally, like, I think they were making a hell of a lot more than you and I are. They're wearing their fancy stuff. They had their businesses. They were booming. They were like, we're booked out for 5 months because I don't know. As all the boomers die in their McMansions, Malcolm, it's going to be a lot of trash to haul. A lot of trash. Unless maybe there's like AI incinerator companies that just come with their giant like chewing machines and just like burn the entire house down. Kind of like, have you seen the Elon Musk company, the Boring Company? Have you seen their tunneling machine?
Giant AI worms that goes through.
Yeah, it's like it looks kind of like the worm. It just like digs the tunnels. This like giant, but maybe we'll just have that for like incinerating boomer houses. I'm excited for that, but we'll see. Anyway, we have to engineer our children to be a new ruling class, and I want to go into biotech. Can we do that, please?
All right. We'll do. I mean, we're already in it. It recently leaked that we've been funding research into germline gene editing. So, who knows what else we're funding?
No, but every time, like, like Octavian talks about Pokemon and stuff, I'm like, Octavian, did you know you can make your own Pokemon? You just have to, it's first step one. Got to get you to read, buddy. You got to sound out these words. He sounded out his first word, by the way, in front of me at least.
Oh, he's done it for me, but it's a fight.
He didn't fight with me because it was the name of candy. So I think that's the secret. That's what got him to be potty trained in the first place, was the marshmallow bribes. So
I'll work more with him on it this weekend.
Yeah, same. I'm just gonna. He can have any candy, the name of which he can sound out phonically. I think it's gonna be it. But then we're gonna get him bioengineering his own Pokemon. If you can make the dire wolf, you can make Pikachu. This is what I'm saying, okay? Anyway, I love you a lot, Malcolm.
Love you too. For dinner tonight, we're just gonna do a rendang reheat, and then I'll mix my leftovers with last night's leftovers for tomorrow.
Or we can do rendang leftover taquitos tomorrow.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah.
With so much on the line, shareholders happily pay these privileged men and women millions of dollars a year for their services. But they are still just employees. They come to work every day and go home like everyone else. So what the f do these people actually do all day?
Musk has officially rebranded the company as X. He wants the app to be central to everyday life, with a hand in everything from communications to finance to gaming.
And ultimately, absolutely, I should have been on top of this, and I feel really, really bad and regretful that I wasn't.
So today, I'm excited to announce an entirely new AR platform with a revolutionary new product.
The real answer to what a CEO actually does is whatever they want. Within the company, they are only answerable to the board of directors, and the only power that board of directors has over them is to decide their compensation package or to fire them. The board of directors themselves are representatives of the company's shareholders, and in a lot of small companies, the biggest shareholders and the chairman of the board is also the CEO. So the board can't do anything apart from give advice and hope the CEO listens to it. That's only for small companies though. It is incredibly rare for the CEOs of public companies to have this much power. In fact, there is only one company in the S&P 500 where the CEO cannot be voted out by the board, and that's Meta's Mark Zuckerberg, since he owns a majority of a special type of share in the company. For every other CEO, their only real job is to not get fired by the board. The best way to do that is to keep the board that represents the shareholders happy by delivering strong business performance. Make Green Line go up is a simple objective, but it still doesn't answer what they actually do all day, since that goal can be achieved in so many ways. But I have to make this video before good work makes a funnier, better version of it. Again. So let's imagine that you wake up one day in the body of a random Fortune 500 CEO, and you need to make it through the day without being found out. Here are the things that only a CEO can do from the moment that you walk into the office until the moment you leave, probably quite late at night. The first task that only a CEO is allowed to perform in a large company is to choose the direction the company will take. As CEO, only you can decide if your company will acquire another company, introduce a new product line, focus on growth or cutting costs, open in a new country, or just keep things running exactly as they are. A good CEO should talk with the board, their employees, and occasionally outside consultants before making these decisions. As CEO, talking to these parties can alert you to risks that have been overlooked, or better opportunities to be pursued instead. As CEO, there are different ways to get this feedback. Some try to be as hands-on as possible. They will talk directly to customers, do their own sales calls, and work weekends at stores. Other CEOs decide what to do based on financial statements and the advice of senior managers that pass feedback up the corporate hierarchy. The first type of CEO normally gets more praise from being a hands-on manager that really knows their business, but both styles have pros and cons. CEOs that spend too much time performing low-level business operations can get too concerned with details. A hands-on CEO can only manage a company so large before their style of management becomes incompatible with getting the information they need to make good decisions. No matter what approach you choose to take, as CEO, you are still the only person that can decide the direction of the company. Are you going to rebrand to X.com? Are you going to remove a headphone jack from your flagship product? Are you going to pivot from selling books to selling everything? The average CEO does not make that many big decisions in a day. They often don't make that many big decisions in their entire career, but they do spend a lot of their time every day talking to people whose opinions they value. So when they do need to make decisions, they can make the best one possible. But making decisions that could change the course of an entire company's future is just the first thing that a CEO needs to do when they get to work, and the other three tasks don't get any easier. So it's time to learn how money works to find out what good CEOs actually do all day. This week's lesson was sponsored by HubSpot. As CEOs, it's imperative to stay ahead of the curve and be informed about the latest trends and changes in the industry. It's not about following every buzzword or trend on social media. Instead, it's about diving deep into comprehensive reports from trusted sources like the AI Trends for Marketers from HubSpot. This report is a goldmine of information, delving into the intricacies of AI in marketing. It covers topics ranging from predictive analytics, which can forecast customer behaviors and optimize campaign strategies, to the rising importance of chatbots in enhancing customer service and engagement. Furthermore, it emphasizes the role of AI in personalization, ensuring that marketing messages resonate more deeply with individual consumers. But it's not just about understanding these trends. The report also offers actionable strategies on how to leverage them. For instance, it provides case studies on businesses that have successfully integrated AI-driven chatbots, tips on how to utilize predictive analytics for targeted marketing campaigns, and best practices for creating personalized content that truly engages the audience. These insights are more than just interesting reads. They're practical tools and strategies that CEOs and marketers can implement to stay ahead in the ever-evolving world of marketing. There's a wealth of knowledge packed into this report, making it an essential read for CEOs and marketers who are serious about leveraging the power in their strategies. Use my link in the description and start exploring the AI Trends for Marketers report today. The second thing that only a CEO can do is decide how the company's money is spent. A good CEO should take advice from their chief financial officer and other staff before making decisions like taking out a loan, issuing a dividend, or making a purchase. But ultimately, only the CEO possesses the authority to spend the company's money at their discretion. Since you have woken up to find yourself as the CEO of a very large company, it would be impossible for you to make every single transaction yourself. The largest transaction made by a company was $202 billion, which was paid by the British telecommunications company Vodafone to acquire Mannesmann in the year 2000.
That is a lot of money.
If you were the CEO of these companies, this deal would need your approval. But small transactions happen thousands of times in a day in companies because staff and suppliers need to be paid and basic expenses need to be covered. A good CEO will set up a framework for spending that lends their authority to use company money to staff in positions like payroll or to normal staff members through corporate cards to cover travel or general expenses. This framework should have levels of spending that need to be approved by different levels of management. If a junior analyst needs to book flights to attend a conference, they should be able to put that on a corporate card and get the expense approved by their manager. If the manager wants to reward that analyst with a $25,000 bonus, then they should require approval from their manager and possibly an independent payroll manager. Progressively bigger spends should need approval from progressively higher levels of management.
Probably the most significant announcement of the day is that we're excited to announce that we're going to be building a gigafactory in Mexico.
A good trick to cut down on expenses that you can use as a CEO is to rewrite the expenses framework to make it harder to get approvals for spending. If it's too difficult to spend money, staff won't do it unless it's really necessary. Saving money is good, but if your company misses out on opportunities because of it, it can reduce the returns you provide to shareholders. It's the shareholders who decide if you keep your job, so getting spending frameworks right is important. You want your staff to have everything they need to do their jobs, but not too much that they waste money on unnecessary shit. As a CEO, you can delegate making this expense framework to your CFO, but you still want to sit down with them on a regular basis to make sure that people at every level of the company aren't spending too much, but also aren't being stifled by financial bureaucracy. The next thing that only a CEO can do is act as the public face of a company. As the CEO of a large company, you need to accept that you are responsible for selling the company and its operations to the public because they are your customers and investors.
Get out there on the factory floor, get out there in the stores, talk to customers, think about what would you love to have.
Top CEOs spend a lot of their time talking to the press about how their company is going to deliver strong returns to shareholders. CEOs of big companies have communications teams that schedule interviews and prepare talking points. Whether they are delivering good news or downplaying bad news, a CEO's job is to convince anybody watching that their stock is undervalued and that the products their company offers are better than the competition. Making lots of media appearances is a great career move for a CEO for two reasons. The first reason is that it does influence markets. According to research from Oxford University's Said Business School, if a new CEO presents their strategy within their first 100 days, it has an overall positive impact on stock price. If the CEO keeps their investors happy, they keep their job. The second reason that new CEOs for large companies are often hired is because they are well known by the investing public because they have appeared in media before. High-level executives often hire their own personal public relations team to get them in articles and on news segments that talk about the work they are doing because they know it's the best way to land a C-suite job at a Fortune 500 company. If you are already a CEO of a large company, you get the same advantage as an incumbent president. Just by doing your job, you are getting attention. If a new board of directors at another company already knows of you and your track record, they will be more likely to draw up a competitive offer if you ever want to switch firms. The fourth thing that only a CEO can do is a less formal responsibility, but also their most important responsibility. They dictate how the business operates every day. That might sound the same as choosing a direction for the company, but it's focused internally on staff and systems.
It's not like, of course the CEO has to live the culture, has to, be able to make sure the leadership team lives those values. But if you can switch on every person, every employee's, every team member's own mindset to say, well, I'm not just working here, Microsoft's working for me, then you've achieved.
Some CEOs like to encourage a relaxed atmosphere where people get good results because they feel comfortable and love coming to work. Other CEOs push professionalism at all costs and demand that their staff hold themselves to the highest standards no matter what they do or they will be let go. As a CEO, you will need to decide what kind of business environment you want to create. But before you choose, you need to know that certain approaches work better in some businesses than others. I used to work in investment banking, and the assumption was that you would show up on time in a suit every day and you would work late nights and weekends until your work was done. Anything less than that, and you were going to get the tap on the shoulder. The CEOs of hospitals expect the same level of professionalism out of their staff because people's lives are literally on the line. This approach wouldn't work as well in normal companies though, because people in these professions only put up with these extreme expectations because they are compensated extremely well. Unless you want to pay all of your staff like investment bankers or doctors, a more relaxed corporate environment is a better play, or you will have high staff turnover. Big tech companies have done the opposite. They have relaxed dress codes, and they have built offices with free cafeterias and luxury amenities to get their staff to want to work extra hours instead of demanding it. Depending on what
Even the bad guys, even the ones I kill.
Even Ramsay Bolton.
You know, Ramsay's a misunderstood fellow.
What are we misunderstanding?
He had a hard childhood. Yeah.
There's a good excuse. Do you like killing your characters?
No, I don't.
Then
But
why do you do it so much, George?
I do think it needs to be done.
Big fan of death up there, okay.
You know, Valor Morgulis, all men must die. I think it's part of life, and art needs to reflect life. Particularly if you're writing a fantasy novel, an epic fantasy novel. Certainly since the days of Tolkien, so many fantasy novels have been about war. I mean, there's a war at the center of Lord of the Rings. You know, the Sauron and his great armies of orcs and Southlings and Easterlings and otherlings are all moving out, and the free men of the West are fighting against them. And of course, in my books, there's a considerably more complicated war going on. But you look at all of the other writers who've been in between, and there's wars and wars and wars. Now, I'm not saying you have to write about war. There are many other interesting things to write about, and I've written about some of them. I don't have a war in all my books, but if I'm going to write about war, if any writer is going to write about war, then I want him to treat war honestly. And one thing I know about war from people who served in Vietnam and served in other wars is, you know, it does bring out the beast in men, and anybody can die. It doesn't matter if you're the hero. I think everybody who died in any war thought they were the hero right to the moment that the bullet blew off the top of their skull. So it irritates me when I'm watching a movie or reading a book, and the hero is going through incredible dangers, him and his 6 buddies, and none of them die. You know, maybe one of them gets wounded at some point, but they all survive pretty much untouched at the end. I mean, and Tolkien, which I read when I was young and at a pretty formative age, I think. That book had an immense influence on me. And it does have some powerful deaths in it. The death of Boromir still resonates with me. That was a powerful moment. The death of Gandalf in the Mines of Moria, when the Balrog drags him down to the thing, and he says, "Fly, you fools!" And that's enormously powerful because you know, especially at that point in the book, because Gandalf is the father figure. Gandalf is the guy who has the answers. Gandalf is the one who knows what they should do and how they should do it. And suddenly he's gone, and now the hobbits are on their own with Strider and Boromir and people they don't necessarily trust because their relationships are still fairly new at that point, and they're facing untold dangers, and they don't have Gandalf to warn them of exactly what's around the next turn in the bend. That's a hugely powerful moment, which I actually, if it had been me, Gandalf would have stayed dead. I think. Bring it. You know, bringing him back is surprising, but in some ways it undercut the power of that moment. And by setting up those moments, Tolkien also set me up for the moment where it seemed like Frodo had died. You know, when I'm reading the end of the Two Towers and Shelob stabs him and he seems to be dead, and Sam takes the ring, and then the book is over. You know, and you have to wait for the next book. I really thought Frodo was dead. I thought Tolkien had earned his stripes with me. He had killed Boromir. He had killed Fred, and now he killed Frodo. My God, I really don't know what's going to happen in this book. Anyone can die. And it became so much more exciting at that point because anyone could die. The peril was real. And that's the feeling I want my readers to have, that if you're going to enter...
Fear is the feeling you want your readers to have. Yeah.
Yes, actually. In a word, if you're going to write about fearful situations, I want you to have fear, and the right kind of fear. I mean, we go on roller coaster rides, and we're scared, right? Roller coaster rides are scary, supposedly, but we're not really scared. We know that we're going to get off the roller coaster after 3 minutes, and however high we go, and then we plunge down, and there's a certain thrill and I guess an adrenaline rush or something like that. So we like to be scared in certain senses, but that's one kind of fear. But there's another kind of fear that you feel when, like, you're all alone and you're walking in a bad neighborhood, and suddenly you hear footsteps behind you, and you turn and you see some people coming, and you don't know who the hell they are, and you know that's a moment. Or a moment that a soldier or a policeman or anyone fears when they're in a situation where their life is on the line. I mean, that's a much more visceral kind of fear, and that's the kind of fear I want the reader to feel. I mean, I think writing is about strong emotions. I want you to be afraid when I'm putting the characters in a scary situation. When a character dies, I want you to grieve for that character as you would for a friend or a loved one or a parent, and this entire, vicarious experience, which is my goal as a writer. I want you, if I'm going to describe a feast, I don't want to just say yes and then they ate a feast.
It was delicious.
I wanted you to smell the food and taste the food, whether it's delicious food or bad food or whatever. Smell the particular things. If it's a joust, I want you to have the excitement of getting caught up in who's going to win the joust. If it's a sex scene, I want you to get hot and bothered. Or I want you not just to read my work, but to live my work. I know they're giving away this book bags here that some of the, I guess it went with the VIP tickets, that says a quote I said a couple years ago about a reader lives 1,000 lives before he dies. The man who never reads lives only one. But I've always felt that. I think reading is about vicarious experience. I look back on Tolkien, which I read, like I said, when I was 12 and 13, and I remember things that happened in the book, from half a century later, as if I lived them. I don't remember the actual things that I lived at that time. I have forgotten who sat behind me in geography class and, what I was doing that June, of my 13th year and all that. So much of this memory is gone, but the memory of these great books that I read at that time, not just Tolkien, but H.P. Lovecraft, Robert E. Howard, Robert A. Heinlein, some of the books I was reading for school and all that, the classics of literature, Dickens and so forth, Shakespeare, those are very much part of me. And I think they're part of us all of us readers. We absorb this stuff, and it shapes us as much as the real events of our real lives. So in that sense, it is real. So
I think for all of us here, you've created something that's done that for us. So thank you very much. George R. R. Martin.
One of the things I found reading the books, and of course watching the series, is I have a lot of friends who have children, and they struggle for months months on how to name one child. One child. And you, sir, have named thousands of people. Where does the inspiration for these names come from? Because there's the why. I mean, you've got the Jon Snow, and then you've got crazy exotic names as well. Where do you find all the inspiration for the names?
Names are very hard.
I bet.
That's an interesting question. Names are really, really hard. And I need to know the name of a character before I can write about them. I met a writer once. I won't mention her name. She was a very successful science fiction fantasy writer. But I remember years ago I happened to be visiting her in her house, and it was so long ago she was working on her IBM Selectric. So that gives you an idea of how long ago it was. Didn't have computers yet, and she was finishing a novel, and I noticed that there were like no names. There was like X13. X13 turned out. What, you named a character X13? She said, oh no, I have a hard time with names, so I put them at the end. I have this list where I number all the characters like A1, A2, A3, and then I write the book with that. And then when I'm done, I invent names for them and use the search. And put X13 is Fred, and then Fred appears. And I can't write about Fred unless I know that his name was Fred. Knowing that he's Fred influences the whole way I write about him, and so forth. So that method of working, different writers work different ways. That was completely alien for me, but. One of the things about names, when you're a wee tiny little writer just starting out, one of the things they teach you is when you're writing a story, never give two characters in a story names that begin with the same letter, because the reader will confuse them. And I followed that rule for many years, but then when I was writing Ice and Fire, I said, wait a minute, I'm planning on having more than 26 characters. What am I going to do here? Am I going to name them like X-Fred? So I decided to ignore that rule. In fact, reading history, I decided to go even further. If it's bad to name two characters, give characters names that start with the same letter. Mm-hmm. It's really bad to give two characters in the same story the same name. So I looked at, reading English history, which was the inspiration for that. If you read English history, and you guys are Canadians, I presume you know a little of English history, everybody in it is named Edward and Henry. It's really, the history of England is a history of Edward and Henry. And occasionally Richard sneaks in and does a little mischief. But, and somehow, yet we keep them, we attach numbers to them, we attach, secondary names, Edward of Woodstock, Henry of York or whatever, and we're able to distinguish one from the other with nicknames. And I said, I'm going to do that. That's much more realistic. I'm going to have these family names, and like many families I know in the real world, they'll be, I'm naming you after your grandmother, I'm naming you after your grandfather. There was this great king, and you want to curry favor, so of course you're going to name your child after the king. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to show all these naming patterns, and they all occur in the book, where you see, Robert comes to the throne, and a lot of children around the same time suddenly seem to have the name Robert in numerous families. But you also see families like the Starks, who keep having a Brandon every generation, every other generation. There's a Brandon of some sort, going back to their ancestor Bran the Builder, and the Lannisters, who always have the T.Y., Tywin, Tybalt, Tyrion, so forth. So the echoes of family names and family naming patterns. I also wanted to show the ethnic groups. So, I have successive waves of invasion that have hit Westeros in this backstory, if you read its history. And, of course, they started out with the First Men, and the First Men tend to have very simple descriptive names like Stark or Strong or Mud, or, where they're named after something. C words. And then the Andals come in, and their names are a little more elaborate, and they don't tend to be named after things. So like Lannister or Arryn, these are Andal names. And then, of course, you get the Valerians and the Targaryens coming in, who have the very exotic names with all the AEs and the Ys and the odd spellings, like Daenerys Targaryen, which was a pretty exotic name, I thought. And bespoke an exotic past that went well with the silver hair and the purple eyes and so forth. It is somewhat startling that I receive all these baby pictures on the email of little girls who are being named Daenerys, and you know, in a few more years, probably the first wave of them has already hit kindergarten by now, and there must be kindergarten teachers all over the United States and Canada cursing my name as they, no, you spell my name with an A-E and a Y at the end.
There are some great scenes. I mean, Aegon's conquest at the beginning of this book, as would I be right in saying, a sort of, you know, a version of the Norman conquest of England of 1066, but on dragonback.
With dragons.
Aegon the First arriving on Balerion the Dread. I mean, it is just amazing. Is this, can I ask, one of the HBO shows in development? Can you tell us about any of those, by the way? Blood Moon has wrapped something, hasn't it?
I can't.
Go on.
There's probably an HBO agent in the in the auditorium even now. I can say, as I have said before, we started out with a number of different ideas, all of them prequels. One show, which I've been calling The Long Night, but HBO keeps saying it's not titled yet. So the show that's not called The Long Night yet has just finished filming up in Belfast, and is now, and other places, not just Belfast, Italy as well. And Jane Goldman is the writer and the showrunner on that. You've probably been familiar with her work. She was the scriptwriter on several of the X-Men movies. She did Kick-Ass, and she did the Kingsman, both Kingsman things. She scripted Neil Gaiman's Stardust. So she's a very experienced screenwriter, and she's done this story, and it is set, 5,000 years in the past of Westeros, so way, way, way before the events of Game of Thrones. And that's the one that is furthest along at the moment, and it's in pre-production, and right now it's just a pilot, but it's got Naomi Watts in it, starring, it's got Miranda Richardson, a lot of other very exciting actors, and we'll probably be finding out in the next couple months whether HBO is actually going to order the full series of that.
That is very
And
exciting.
meanwhile, we have 2 other pilots that are also in active development at some stage, and hopefully in the near future, one or both of them will be greenlit to shoot a pilot, and we may get more than one Westeros show on the air.
Let's talk about the history of Westeros, because this is your latest book. It's, as I said at the beginning, it's a masterpiece of popular history, and you can tell how steeped you are in the form because of the way you've constructed this book. Tell us why you chose to do this, pulling together earlier writings, I think, on some of them quite substantial, on the history of Westeros. Why put this together now?
Well, as I was writing the books, I would have people think about or refer to things that happened in history occasionally from time to time. And it's actually in the novels, references to dead kings, references to legendary knights and so forth of the past. At a certain point, my publishers said, we want to publish a concordance. We want to publish a world book, because you've got all this history in that. And I was in the middle of writing novels, and I said, yeah, well, that's a great idea. I'd love it. I want it heavily illustrated. I want lots of gorgeous fantasy on it, and I love illustrated books. I always have since I was a kid, reading, Robin Hood and King Arthur books illustrated by people like Howard Pyle and N.C. Wyeth. Gorgeous, gorgeous books. I cut my teeth on those. So I wanted my books done the same way. So, and I said, and I have little bits of history in my head that I haven't had an opportunity to put in the books yet, put in the novels yet, but I'll include them too as sidebars. So we hired Elio Garcia and Linda Antonsen, who are 2 of my uber fans. They run the Westeros website, which is the oldest and the biggest of the websites devoted to Westeros and its book. And they were supposed to organize all the historical references that were already in the novels, assemble everything, and write a rough account of it, and then I would go in and I would polish that rough account, and then I would put in these sidebars, which were material that had never appeared. So we were supposed to have 50,000 words of prose, and then the rest would be art on every page, gorgeous art. So by the time Elio and Linda had assembled everything, we already had 70,000 words of prose. And then I wrote 350,000 words of sidebars. And my publisher said, wait, we can't do this. There won't be art at every page. We've already spent the whole art budget. There'll be art every 20 pages. So we ripped out all my sidebars, and we got the book together. It was published a few years ago, The World of Ice and Fire, a very nice book.
Beautiful book.
But then I had all these leftover sidebars that were kind of a history of various Targaryen kings, and I could have written more. I was only like halfway through writing the sidebars when I realized how long they were. So at a certain point, when we realized that Game of Thrones, the TV show, was winding down, but there might be successor TV shows, I said to my publishers, well, we've always been talking about doing this history book, which I was calling the Grimmarillion as a play on Tolkien. Should I finish Winds first, or should I? Because the Grimmarillion is almost complete, at least up to Aegon, the regency of Aegon III. And it includes material in it that is going to be the basis of some of these successor shows. So maybe we should get it out first before the shows. And they agreed, so they said, yeah, finish that one, and then go back to Winds of Winter. So I sat down to finish that one. I polished all of the material I'd written. I expanded a few of the sidebars. But then I had to write, there was particularly King Jaehaerys I, Jaehaerys the Conciliator. I'd kind of skipped over him in the sidebars because he was the old king. He reigned for 55 years, and I'd just sort of written 55 years of peace and prosperity. And that was the big hole in this book. And I said, well, I can't just have two sentences on Jaehaerys. He reigned for 55 years. 55 years of peace and prosperity is pretty dull, though. There must have been something that happened during that, and I started inventing all the things that had happened during Jaehaerys' reign, all of his children who were trouble in many different ways, and conspiracies, and the roughness when he first took things, and that expanded too. But I loved it, and I finished all that, and I finally got the whole book done through the regency of Aegon III, and I'm very pleased with it. It's different. I know many of you are getting a copy here while you were here. It's not a conventional novel. It is imaginary history, written in the style. You've probably read. My real influence on this was Thomas B. Castaigne's 4-volume History of the Plantagenets, which any of you have not read, go out and find a copy in the used bookstore. It's wonderfully written. It's full of great stories, most of which academic historians have probably disproved by now, but they're still terrific stories. And the Plantagenets were a family that was equally interesting as to the Targaryens. They lacked only dragons, otherwise they would be right up there. So that was my influence, and I tried to do that in this imaginary history book.
Costain is the second best book ever written about the Plantagenets, actually. One more question here submitted from an audience member. Aurélie Passy, I think is the name. The second volume of Fire and Blood won't come out anytime soon, so very pessimistic about your output, but maybe with some justification. But could you give us an idea of some elements that it will contain? We go up to the reign of Aegon the Unlucky here. What are the highlights of the putative next volume of this?
Well, I mean, this book only goes up to the regency of Aegon and ends when Aegon III actually reaches manhood and takes control. So I have his reign to cover, which includes the death of the last dragons. Although Aegon III is called the Dragonbane, there are still 3 or 4 dragons kicking around when he takes the crown, and there are none by the time he's over. So that one thing I'm just going to cover why and what happens there, and some of the troubles and rebellions of his reign. And then ultimately his children, who are fairly interesting. I mean, he has ultimately 5, one of whom is Daeron I, the young dragon who conquers Dorne. And he's a 14-year-old Alexander the Great kind of hero king figure. But he dies young, and then his brother Baylor takes over. And Baylor is very religious, he's more of a St. Louis kind of figure. Little extreme in his religiosity, and among other things, he imprisons his 3 sisters in luxurious imprisonment in the Red Keep, the Maiden Vault, but he doesn't like them walking around court because they tempt him with, they have breasts and things underneath their clothes, and he finds that very disturbing to contemplate. So he hides them away. So I'll tell their stories, and I'll tell Baylor's story, and then after him, we get a brief reign of Viserys the Second, and then Viserys' son Aegon IV, Aegon the Unworthy, takes over, and he's a very colorful figure himself. I obviously drew on Henry VIII for him. Henry VIII had 6 wives. Aegon the Unworthy had 9 mistresses, and they all exist in my head. I know who they all were and what happened to each of them, and who had their head chopped off, and who had affairs, and who did what. So there's a lot of cool material of that. And then you get into the Blackfire Rebellions, of which there were 5. I've referred to them frequently, so I'll get all the details on the Blackfire Rebellions, and ultimately we'll get up to the Mad King and Robert's Rebellion, and that's where I'll draw it to a close. But when am I going to write it? Well, I got to finish Winds of Winter first, and then probably a Dunk and Egg, and then I don't know. I don't know. I need more hours in the day, and I need to be 20 years younger and all of that. But you can only write one word at a time, so that's what I'm doing.
In this book, we have many, many dragons and many, many Valyrian steel swords. And if you could ride one dragon and wield one sword, which would it be?
Well, if I could ride on one dragon, I might as well go with the biggest, which would be Balerion the Black Dread. He's the mega dragon in this early book. He's the only one that remembers Valyria past a certain point, because he was brought over from Valyria at a little before the doom of Valyria, and he's the biggest and meanest of the dragons that exist. If I could wield only one sword, I don't think it would be any of the Targaryen swords. It would be Dawn, the sword wielded by the Sword of the Morning, the heir of House Dane of Starfall, which is made from the metal from a fallen star. And who knows what magical properties fallen stars bring to Earth.
Well, there's a question here from, again, from somebody, I think who may be in the audience, from Crystal Phillips, who says, are there any scenes in A Song of Ice and Fire that you look back on and smile because they were just so much fun to write? I mean, that sounds like one, but it's not in A Song of Ice and Fire. I mean, are there any that you mentioned the first scene with Bran, are there any that really just give you a tingle when you look back on them?
There are certainly scenes that I remember, but they tend not to be the ones that are fun to write. They tend to be actually the ones that are painful to write. I mean, the hardest thing I ever wrote was the Red Wedding scene in A Storm of Swords. And I knew that was coming. I was enough of an architect there that I was building toward that scene. I've been building for that scene since the first book. But when I actually reached that scene, it was too painful to write. I couldn't write it. I skipped over it. It occurs about 2/3 of the way through A Storm of Swords. I skipped over it and I wrote the scenes that follow. I finished the entire book, and I hadn't written that scene yet. That was the last thing I wrote for Storm of Swords. I had to go back and make myself write it. And it's still emotionally, you become very attached to these characters, believe it or not. I know I have the reputation for gleefully killing some of them, but that's not entirely deserved. Sometimes it's very painful for me to kill them. They're my children, for good or ill. So that was a tough scene to write. Yeah. I do periodically enjoy, if I write something that I'm particularly proud of, that really is, that I think is a good piece of writing, that is vivid and evocative, then that gives me pleasure. But it might not necessarily be the scenes that that you guys would particularly enjoy. Some of them are just quiet things about, oh, I have to describe this landscape, and I sweat and rewrite it, and I finally get, yeah, this is a great description of three guys riding through a grassy meadow. I've gotten the sights and the sounds and the smells of the scene right to put you there. But it's not necessarily anything that ordinary readers or reviewers will ever, oh my God, there was such a beautiful description of the grassy meadow on page 314. So, but.
This is a question from Adrienne Modolo, who says, how is your workspace organized to write a Song of Ice and Fire? Do you have a corkboard like in police investigations, where you've noted all the Targaryens and all the Freys, says Adrienne. Give us a physical sense of how you write and where you write.
Well, I don't have a corkboard. I have maps now, because there's been a beautiful map book called The Lands of Ice and Fire. So I printed out those large-scale maps, and I keep them around me so I can refer to the maps from time to time. Most of the stuff is actually in my head. I do have computer files, you know, with timelines on them, and that I put together over the years, and bits of this and bits of that I can consult from time again. It is sometimes a daunting task. More so nowadays than when I began back in 1991, because the world has become so much bigger and it's become so much more complex. In many ways, I followed the template of Tolkien. You know, if you look at Lord of the Rings, everything begins in the Shire, and with the hobbits, and then as they leave the Shire, they get to Rivendell and they meet some more people. They pick up Strider, they pick up the rest of the Fellowship. But then from that point, they start to split up. First they split into two groups, and then the two groups split into three groups, and etc. Well, I followed more or less the same map. I mean, if you look at Game of Thrones, everybody except Dany is together in Winterfell in the beginning. All the viewpoint characters are there. But then they start splitting, and Dany is still off by herself on another continent, but you know, some of my people go to King's Landing, some of them stay in Winterfell, and then the people who go to King's Landing get separated from each other, and they go in different. And every time a character goes off on a different tangent, they meet other supporting characters. So at this point, I'm really writing not a novel, but 12 intertwined novels, and each character is in a different place with their own antagonists, their own friends, their own secondary and tertiary characters surrounding them. And yes, that is very difficult to keep in my head. I maybe should have organized it all better when I began back in 1991, but
do you ever...
I never thought it would get to that. I mean, remember, I'd written 4 novels before this: Armageddon Rag, Fever Dream, Windhaven with Lisa Tuttle, Dying of the Light. I never had any problems keeping those characters in my head. I didn't need corkboards or anything. I just remembered it all. I had no idea, though, that when I got into this, that the size that it would eventually become. Fortunately, you know, it's the age of computers. We have search and replace functions, and I can load up, you know, my gigantic file and said, okay, what did I ever say about this character? And I go through. Even then, I make mistakes, and my fans, like you people, and even more obsessive people elsewhere, are always eager to point out whenever I've made a mistake. I have particular trouble with the color of people's eyes. And rather famously, I have a horse who changes gender between the first and second books. It's hard to do a search and replace for the sex of a horse. But you know, these errors do sneak in.
Do you ever find you've sort of painted yourself into a corner and you've set up a part of the world that impedes your storytelling?
Yeah, that is the disadvantage of being a gardener. You know, the architect never finds himself building closed rooms that go nowhere, but the gardener sometimes traipses down a branch and finds himself sitting all the way out at the end, realizing he can't get from that branch anywhere else. So sometimes I do go down byways and say, no, I think I took a wrong turn back like 3 chapters ago. Let me rewrite these chapters, or in one case, or remove these chapters. But I never destroy them. I keep them on my computer in case I see a way to put them in later. There's always that. There's rather famously from the last book that was published, As with Dragons, I had a chapter where Tyrion was moving down the River Royne and the Shy Maid, and I wrote this chapter where he meets a character called the Shrouded Lord, and it's a really good chapter. I mean, I like some chapters more than others. This is a terrific chapter, but it's an absolute dead end. Well, I don't know if it's a dead end, but it introduces like 3 additional layers of complication that I didn't think I actually needed. But I liked it so much, I kept trying to fit it in. You know, at first I presented it straight, and then I said, oh, I can't fit it in. I'll present it as a dream. Tyrion has a dream, and he dreams that this happened to him, and it has portents. And then I split it up into like 8 dreams, and every Tyrion chapter, he dreamed a little bit of it. And finally, I gave up and said, I have to rip out all this stuff. It doesn't do me any good. But someday, maybe when I finish the whole book, I'll publish that lost chapter as a little standalone.
The Game of Thrones books describe hundreds of years of history, full of kings and wars, drama and politics, and an awful lot of incest. 300 years ago, Aegon Targaryen took over Westeros, and his dynasty ruled for almost 3 centuries, until Robert Baratheon took over and the main series begins. Targaryen rule was often tumultuous, like the Targaryens almost destroyed themselves in a civil war called the Dance of the Dragons. But in the 100 years before Robert's rebellion, the greatest threat to House Targaryen was the Blackfires. King Aegon Targaryen IV was called the Unworthy because he was a terrible king. He was corrupt and impulsive, full of gluttony and lust. His wife was his sister Nerys, and they had a son called Prince Daeron. But Aegon also took hundreds of other women as lovers, and had dozens of bastard children. Aegon hated Nerys and Daeron, so he spread rumors that Nerys had cheated on him with their brother Aemon, and that Aemon was Daeron's real father. Aegon threatened to name one of his bastards heir to the throne instead of Daeron. Aegon's favorite bastard was Daemon Waters. His mother was Aegon's cousin, Daena the Defiant. Daena had been locked away to preserve her innocence from lustful men, but Daena escaped and hooked up with Aegon. Daena named their son Daemon after a Prince Daemon Targaryen who had lived 50 years earlier. Prince Daemon was renowned as a dangerous man, the wonder and the terror of his age, so the name was an ominous warning of the man who Daemon Waters would become. From a young age, Daemon was a talented warrior. When he was just 12 years old, King Aegon made Daemon a knight, and gave him the legendary Valyrian steel sword, Blackfire. Blackfire was the sword of Aegon the Conqueror, carried by Targaryen kings for centuries. It's a powerful symbol of the Targaryen throne, and Aegon gave it not to his true heir, Prince Daeron Targaryen, but to his bastard son, Daemon. From that day, Daemon took the name Daemon Blackfire. King Aegon died a horrible death, literally rotting under the weight of his obesity. And on his deathbed, he made one last spiteful act. He legitimized all his bastards, giving them the right to inherit like a true-born child. Daeron was still his eldest son and heir, but now his bastards were also in line for the throne, a perfect recipe for conflict. After Aegon died, Daeron became king. He worked to repair the realm that Aegon had corrupted, and he tried to keep friendly with Aegon's bastards. He gave Daemon some land and married him to a woman called Rohan of Tyrosh. King Daeron married a Dornish princess, Miria Martell, and successfully unified Dorne with the rest of Westeros, which the Targaryens had been trying to do since the conquest. King Daeron gave the Dornish more political influence, and Dorne got special rights and privileges that the other kingdoms didn't have, which angered some lords. Houses in the Reach and the Stormlands had been fighting the Dornish for thousands of years, and still saw them as enemies. Aegon the Unworthy had hated the Dornish and tried to attack them, and before him, tens of thousands died in a previous war for Dorne. There was a lot of bad blood here, so when King Daeron got in bed with the Dornish, some people were angry. Some didn't trust Daeron and Miria's son, Prince Baelor Breakspear, because he had the dark hair and dark eyes of a Dornishman, not the blonde hair and purple eyes of a Targaryen. So, a combination of politics and prejudice turned some lords against King Daeron. They looked instead to Daemon Blackfire. He looked like a Targaryen king. And Daemon was way cooler than Daeron. Daeron was weak and scholarly. He liked to read books and listen to women, while Daemon was a big, strong warrior with the legendary sword of kings, Blackfire. Some lords thought Daemon was the better man, and urged him to rebel and take the throne. Daemon was also influenced by his siblings. The great bastards of Aegon the Unworthy included Aegor Rivers, called Bittersteel, Brynden Rivers, called Bloodraven, and Shiera Seastar. Shiera was the most beautiful woman in the realm, and supposedly a sorcerer who bathed in blood to keep her youth. Bittersteel and Bloodraven hated each other because they both loved Shiera, and Shiera chose Bloodraven over Bittersteel. Bittersteel and Bloodraven also had a family rivalry, because Bittersteel's mother was Barbara Bracken, and Bloodraven's mother was Melissa Blackwood, and the Blackwoods and Brackens have hated each other for thousands of years. When Barbara hooked up with King Aegon, the Brackens plotted and schemed to try and make Barbara queen, which could have potentially made Bittersteel heir to the throne. But that went very badly, and the Brackens lost their political influence, while Melissa Blackwood and Bloodraven kept their influence on the throne. So Bittersteel was bitter about the fall of his family, and about Bloodraven getting his girl, Shiera. Author George Martin said Bittersteel was pissed off all his life, and he hated Bloodraven and Daeron. So Bittersteel urged Daemon to rebel against Daeron and claim the throne for himself. There was also this knight called Quentin.
så plådigen panne vel opp for dag. De kommer vel over den hede. Vel Romsdals kuster han styrer i land. Erklærte seg for en fjende. Han fulgte efter 1400 mann, som alle hadde vondt i sinne. Vel opp for dag. De kommer vel over den hede. De skjedde og brente bare de kom frem. Alt folk rett manne de krenke. Holdingens av makt rørte jeg dem. De spottet den i greten, det enke vel opp for dag. De kommer vel over den hede. Soldatene rodde på kongens tog. De selv må landet forsvare forbannet. Lede til nyttingstråd. Så nå sider blått vil spare vel opp for dag. De kommer vel over den hede. De bønder har folket leser og lom. Med skarpe økser på nakke i bredde. Oi til sammenkom. Med skatter så ville de snakke vel opp for dag. De kommer vel over den hede. Vel opp for dag. De kommer vel over den hede. 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 Et underlidet der løper en sti, som han måtte kringen kalte låken, skynder seg der forbi. I den skal fienden falle vel opp for dag. De kommer vel over den hede. Med døde kropper ble kringestrødd. De rammer fegen nok at det ungdomsblod som ulflod. De største piebegrene vel opp for dag. De kommer vel over den hede. Den kneiser støtte på samme sted som Norges venner måtte tro verre. Når man som meg blir het, så titt hans øyne den skoe vel opp for dag. De kommer vel over den hede. Vel opp for dag. De kommer vel over den hede. Over den hede. Over den hede. Over den hede. Over den
Doktor Greve dusj.
dansar i hötedans, slagering, glädje, röja, norrismän till Hildarting. Och viljan till höjra kväje, både viljan till norr och tryggva man hålla tryggva sång. Här ska röjmas, tryggva glimmor, dansar i hötedans, slagering, glädje, röja, norrismän till Hildarting. Och viljan till höjra kväje, både viljan till norr och tryggva man hålla tryggva sång. Här ska röjmas, tryggva glimmor, dansar i hötedans, slagering, glädje, röja, norrismän till Hildarting. Och kongeren heter släktjes skoja, hära stött och sand, det högre läntjes öster, vära bygger av Norrisland, det glimmor, dansar i hötedans, slagering, glädje, röja, norrismän till Hildarting. Och knorreva bygger av Norrisland, det gott här röjen och nämne, hatja, mällen och föra, kräva, kören, middel och ställna, glimmor, dansar i hötedans, slagering, glädje, röja, norrismän till Hildarting. For kilter, maur og bagi, stavnar, borne, maur og bag, kiltan, kjøller og topp i hei, som søver, kenga fra, glimmor, dansar i hötedans, slagering, glädje, röja, norrismän till Hildarting. Og kongeren sitter og hasa det, at kalla til søgnar, mennesker, miskel og sikkert av salta, skjekta, her vi voksa, vantje, glimmor, dansar i hötedans, slagering, glädje, röja, norrismän till Hildarting. Og bjørnen jo fram til høykleie, vi brinner jo blomk og brante, søjane leggja fra landet ut, og silda fra Norrisland til glimmor, dansar i hötedans, slagering, glädje, röja, norrismän till Hildarting. Og från og glädje, sveinar, malt og herve, skulle der piltja, og man tog første fredags røyme, tattast ei bratta, biltja, glimmor, dansar i hötedans, slagering, glädje, röja, norrismän till Hildarting. Ein kom nærra bergje, og man vi sterk og må, og i hende jattleren av rinka røytje, han med hea sendte, glimmor, dansar i hötedans, slagering, glädje, röja, norrismän till Hildarting. Kongeren så til åra, tekur peilig glei, og gaune simar satte, og unge nærva verst, og nevner av navne, glimmor, dansar i hötedans, slagering, glädje, röja, norrismän till Hildarting. Og einar skal du nevna mer, vel kan gå og spenna, tampar, eller mor menneske, boje, hørva, drøvra, renna, glimmor, dansar i hötedans, slagering, glädje, röja, norrismän till Hildarting. Og høyre tro træt, du hunche med vår vilt, og vi mer færa, du skal være med narva, garspor, ormen, et forsværa, glimmor, dansar i hötedans, slagering, glädje, röja, norrismän till Hildarting. Trink og teir til strandar, og man røyker menn og rester, gunnar, brost og gjøre skaltar, brå og knørr, neste glimmor, dansar i hötedans, slagering, glädje, röja, norrismän till Hildarting. Og vindan tar opp sinne siltje seg, og ut og i havet genka, sova sakta, konkurren har stort i harmen og lenka, glimmor, dansar i hötedans, slagering, glädje, röja, norrismän till Hildarting. Og hekta flattes, voja og landa, norrismän tar skilt, og Danmarks konger og Sveriges konger, reine saman, hilt og glimmor, dansar i hötedans, slagering, glädje, röja, norrismän till Hildarting. Og Danmarks konger og Sveriges konger, genka saman i rak, og så der skuld og Norris konger, kjøtta døv og fag, glimmor, dansar i hötedans, slagering, glädje, röja, norrismän till Hildarting. Og senta på til Eirik, ja, det var bort til henne, han skal klippa flåtar uta höjra som det jampar dörre åtta sökte jättare stöjra kom det glimmer dansar höttedans slajring kläger röja mörresmän till darting Danmarks konger till hårda tegur ledde så hörne greja han och i hörme länka tek och spela med hagn och laja glimmer dansar höttedans slajring kläger röja mörresmän till darting och jättliren hoxa vi själv och sär gava till mans där röjna kultiger inte hörme länka vi taskare vakta lajna glimmer dansar höttedans slajring kläger röja mörresmän till darting om allt det tas för upp till konkurrerna heter av runt och nöjve skall hörme länka täka om att det kostar löjve glimmer dansar höttedans slajring kläger röja mörresmän till darting och jämlaren ständer av röj och burka kladder i skarla grej kultiger inte hörme länka försöker och nej glimmer dansar höttedans slajring kläger röja mörresmän till darting och jämlaren kallar till svina med en käpp och måna till möta stante väl och manne leat i blå och berer göta glimmer dansar höttedans slajring kläger röja mörresmän till darting en hårdriksmänna kongsers knör kommer väl bajta knoj ganga fram och gör och stroj ätla läta loj glimmer dansar höttedans slajring kläger röja mörresmän till darting och Eirikur tala till sin i luttla tuska tjamar standa tuska värja själva mer om man kommer ju vanta glimmer dansar höttedans slajring kläger röja mörresmän till darting och löttet hejra som till koja och här så lantje långt och frätte norsk och körna bergas man mörres kanske glimmer dansar höttedans slajring kläger röja mörresmän till darting och löttet har skjev i hörna hela alla och sära vinna helt och vacka i lott och läten normen löttet har finna glimmer dansar höttedans slajring kläger röja mörresmän till darting och nu ska vi vatta ja vi kvöja i långra sinne vi ska leta här på vannan tot och petre lätja i minne glimmer dansar höttedans slajring kläger röja mörresmän till darting
Salten hav till Norge hans kursman bäst han den aldrig gulden brans klippar han ett fan sin grav där vankar sår lovlig även han där väl upp för dag de kommer väl över den heten Sinklar i drog och världfölken blå för svenska pengar hade strid där hjälperna i god i gräset var en varma den flyter väl upp för dag det kommer väl över den heten månen skinner om natten blek det var väl så sakta det trillar en havro upp av vandet steg och spåret där singlar illa väl upp för dag det kommer väl över den heden Vänt om du skoske man det gäller ditt liv så fan kommer du till Norge jag säger för i stans men aldrig kommer du tillbaka väl upp för dag det kommer väl över den heden lite är din sang drog giftiga troll till en stor spår rolycka fangar jag i dig en gång i min våg jag lader dig hugga i stycken väl upp för dag mann som alle hadde ånd i synda vel opp for dag. Vi kommer vel over den hytte. De skremte og brente var de kom frem av folket, det monne de krenke oldingens mann. Margrethe Eiden, de spotte den gredende enke vel opp for dag. De kommer vel over den hytte. Barnet ble grevet i moderens skuss, og unkelig verden smilte røkken mellom den jammer og nød, som kernen av landet ville vel opp for dag. De kommer vel over den hytte. Og påstrykken løp fra grande til nærmeste grande. Dalen sønner i skjola i krøp. Det måtte her sinklar sande vel opp for dag. De kommer vel over den hytte. Soldaterne rodde på kongens tog. De så selv landet forsvaret forbandet. Ved en unyttingsblod som nå sitt blod vil spare vel opp for dag. De kommer vel over den hytte. De vakter av vågen, vesker og lån, med skarpe økser på nakke i dritten. Begge til sammen den kom, med skotten så ville de snakke vel opp for dag. De kommer vel over den hytte. Der løper en sti som man måtte kringlen kalde lågen. Skulle seg der forbi, i den skal fienden falle vel opp for dag. De kommer vel over den hytte. Den henger ei mere på vegg, det sikter grå herdede skudde, nakken og løfter sitt våte skrekk, og venter med lengsel sin mutte vel opp for dag. De kommer vel over den hytte. Dette første stod her sinklar galt, han brødde det og oppga sin ånde ved skott.